I'm gonna start in about 3, 4 minutes. So just get the word out, because people, they're shadow banning the hell out of me these days. They're shadow banning the hell out of me. Uh, okay. Now let me see. They did something with the formatting on my phone. Okay. Uh, no. Um, Set up later in settings. Next. They did something new with this damn phone. I don't know what the hell that's about. Okay. How many of you guys saw that Donald Trump slashed or talked bad about Juneteenth? I'm not so upset about that, in the sense that I think black people, like Jews, should just have their damn holiday and people come to accept it, right? We should just do our thing. We shouldn't we shouldn't we shouldn't let anybody tell us what's a good day, right? We should be able to just be happy and do our own thing. And we shouldn't be waiting around for anyone to tell us what's a holiday or whatever. We can do our own thing of our own accord. What's wrong with that? Why do we need um, somebody to tell us when we can celebrate or why we should celebrate, right? Um, Come on, talk to me. What you guys, I mean, to me, someone's going to complain, Donald Trump is against black people. And I'm thinking, look, what do we want? How come we can't do what we want to do, right? Why do we need why do we need other people's help? Why do we need other people's help to celebrate our ancestors and us? Why do we need? That's how the Tethers and everybody else got in. The minute you handed this over to to the feds, the minute you needed somebody else to sign off on it, that's when we got into trouble. That's when we got into trouble. Okay, we got into trouble when we. Why would a racist get what you wanted right for the holiday? Little one, the cloth is from Ghana. Um, this cloth behind me is from Ghana. And just because folks are mad and doing all this anti Africa stuff, there's nice stuff, nice people in Africa. We can appreciate it. There are a lot of white folk hate the shit out of Africa, but love African stuff. So I don't hate Africans. I can like African stuff and be a black American. So this is African black women's righteous. I'm gonna put this in here because they're not gonna like what I'm saying. Yes. I'm almost done. I got one more to do, and that's gonna just be here we go. I know I'm just so excited and got everything done. I had some incredible tilapia fish. You got to get an air fryer, people. And pretty soon I'm gonna have my Vitamix. Um, okay, now we're on this channel here. And I'm going to put this on Twitter. Ebony Eyes. Okay, everyone. We're almost there. Hello, hello, hello. Yes, we're going to be talking. We're going to be talking about massacres and stuff. I was doing this before, and man, I'm telling you, it is a trip getting old. I don't even feel old per se, but shit happens to you whether you want it or not when you're getting there. So, let me put this up on Twitter. We'll put it up on Twitter, so nobody have an excuse. I'm gonna go. I guess I could do that. I could go live. And what's happening? Here we go. I'm almost there. Nikki Taylor's. I'm gonna show you this book in a second. Oh, this is. Nah, he didn't. Hold on one second. What did folks do? So somebody's in Texas. Where's everybody from? Tell me where you're from by state and place. What cities are you from? Where's everybody from tonight? Where's everybody from? Please, everybody post, this is such a good thing. Okay. Okay. All right. Now I'm here. Ching. Turn this shit around. There you go. All right. Happy Juneteenth and Coonteeth to you if you're a coon. It's Juneteenth if you're a brother or sister. These days I can't tell. We have so many traders in our community, it makes no difference. That's the reason that we're not freer. Hey, Mr. Jenkins. By the way, I have relatives named Jenkins, but they're in Georgia. I hope everybody did some genealogy today. I hope everybody did some connections. And we're going to get right into this. I am behind, but I was listening to Scott Ritter. I hope all of you guys are against any wars. I mean, Iran, their asses are winning and shit. This is crazy. Their asses are winning. They're winning. I'm just saying. Oh, Chicago. What? Detroit. Oh, my God. I've only been to the airport in Detroit. I'm going to try to go. Somebody's from Chicago. I love Chicago, but there's lots of corruption. Decatur, Georgia. Cool. Because everybody know I got big family in Georgia, Baltimore. Star, I didn't know that you were in Baltimore. We got to meet sometime. I mean, Baltimore, I need to go up there. I have family. Baltimore is named for my grandfather. I'm not shitting you. If I were to go and pause it, I go up and Lord Baltimore's daughter married my eighth great grandfather. So Lord Baltimore and Anne Arundel are he's my ninth great grandfather and Anne Arundel's my ninth great grandmother. So Baltimore is yeah. Well Star, I mean if you want, email me, I'll give you my number. I would happily I love Baltimore. Go up and get some seafood. Um I love Baltimore. Baltimore is the second home. My Twitter is there's several. I'll put my Twitter. I've got a couple of them. I don't use all of them. I think what is this one? Uh hold on one second. My Twitter because I they kept taking me off. So I can't use my name. One is Kuna Bomber. Kuna Bomber is one Twitter account. I like that title. Kuna Bomber, and I'll write it again. I love it. Kuna Bomber, because I'm trying to fight coons. Kuna Bomber. Another one is, what is it? DRS1, C Buster. That's and then there's another one. I think that's I have another one I barely use. There's one under my name. I think it's Randy Short, but you know, I'll put these two up. Those are two I use the most. I have another one I use, but not that many people do that. So I try to put, and I do it on multiple channels because we get shadow banned. I was doing a Twitter space with someone, and they, I tried to tell people do not use my name too much on Twitter. They will take your space down. But people think I'm joking. I'm not paranoid. I don't think I'm famous or anything like that. I just know someone doesn't like what I do. And the trickster in me doesn't care. That makes me want to do it more because they don't like it. Someone doesn't like it. So fuck them. I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to keep doing it and do it and do it again. And shoot, they don't stop oppressing us. Why should we care how people who hate us feel? I mean, we can't make them like us. They won't let you fit in. So you got to be you, right? Yes. Braxton Thomas, black people have to want freedom. So let me do this, give you the order tonight. In fact, how many of y'all want a joke? How many of y'all want some jokes? Because this is Juneteenth, so we can do a range of things tonight. And there's so much that I could share tonight. And by the way, I want to tell everyone, I want to thank all the people who've been like supporting the channel. Most of what I do on with the channel is sometimes I help other people if they have an issue. Sometimes I can't. Like there's a sister who I don't know her. I actually I'm gonna see if I can get. I know this sister that was doing all this good work, educating people, right? She was doing all this great work to educate people at the DC jail. and they lied and they fired her. So a warrior sister. Her name is Candace, Elizabeth Candace Eddings. She was in charge of educating the young people in the D.C. jail, and they lied on her. She wouldn't sleep with her boss and this other stuff. That's why I'm going to talk about black women today. You know, there are a lot of unsung men and women in our community, black women and black men, and they go through a lot of horrific stuff. I've seen a lot of black women go through a lot of sexual harassment and abuse just to hold a job. God forbid you're a single parent like she is with three children, three boys, and you're putting up with garbage every day. But this woman's changing lives. But they faked it, they rigged it, and I mean she's almost losing everything. And so, in our little fellowship, we're not big. Sometimes we give money to people, like just send someone $100, send them 50. Won't do everything, but it'll do something, right? Like I need to send something in about 10 days. The sister that I had on that Kamala threw in jail, Sheree Peoples, I need to at least try to send her 50, maybe 75, $100. It doesn't do much, but it's something because our people are hurting. So when people give, I either buy books or I may did something or I might do something for someone. So just know I'm in the same location. It's not all that fancy. So, I'm not traveling the world, although I may travel now and then. But I am going to give you something to laugh about. But I'm going to probably do this later this week, but put out the cash apps of a couple of warrior sisters that are doing the right thing, that need our support. Sheree Peoples, a lady that stood up to Kamala Harris, Sister Eddings, all the stuff that's been done to her. Y'all need to know that the lady I was doing the live with last night, she was looking at losing a $600,000 or $700,000 home, and we all got together. You guys helped. We raised $9,000 to help the sister save her home. I didn't take it. I said, sister, how do we get it to you? And I did it. Okay. I wish TD Jakes and these other black people, I'm on a fixed income. In fact, I'm an SSI person, real talk. So I don't have that much, and I can do a little bit. It doesn't make sense to me that we have all these black billionaires and other people, and we don't help one another. We don't invest in each other. We don't have stores. We used to have all this stuff. So, I want to do something for Miss Eddings. She was helping people get off drugs. All of this is, and it. I'm going to say this, and I don't care how you take it. When you know what our people are up against, it's very difficult not to get depressed sometimes. You see this woman, she was taking me to the jail for us to talk to the young men to give them something. They wanted me there, and that's part of why I think they fired her because she brought me. And we weren't talking about bombs or guns or drugs. We're talking about family, manhood, respecting our sisters, and you fire her? Yeah, I have no idea. The people who truly try to help our people, and then when you get hung out to dry, there's no help for you. There's no help for you. We have to change that. People who speak up for us should get supported. And people say, well, why are you like you are? I'm going to tell you why I'm like I am. One is God. Number two is family. Number three is experiences that I've had. And number four, I speak like I do because people like Sister Star, Mrs. Kelly, Brother Nicholson, Brother Lonnie, Brother Goldsboro, there are people, Brother Dewan, they've been a lifeline in donations. It's not always big, but they do it. They've kept me in the game. So I talk like a black, proud, assertive person because black people back me. They don't just look at my channel. So, send 2, 3, it adds up. When you realize some of us are talking to thousands of people, if the, wow, 30, 40,000 views one gets in a month, if each of the viewers sent a quarter, so I'm not talking about any major outlay. So Sister Star, I mean, I don't want her to go broke, but people just give stuff. And I don't tell people what to do, but do something. And it's the same thing, Braxton Thomas, is that we are guilty of not doing what we can do. Wilmington, North Carolina, Greensboro, North Carolina, U Street, Sugar Hill, Southeast Baltimore, Black Wall Street, uh, all of the black communities, uh, Bronzeville in Chicago, black people working with and supporting each other because they could. Do what you can do. Maybe we won't see full reparations, but we can get as much as you can, do as much as you can for the people that matter. Don't waste it. That's my word of wisdom. Let me stop because I want to read. I don't want to talk. And hold on. And my friend, White Jesus, and he's always telling me, what? Okay. I believe in God because I had to put up with this. I'm going to lose all of my black friends over this person. It's bad enough following White Jesus. Then all the other black people that get mad that you're with White Jesus. Then he says, I'm going to put you down. I'm going to repeat this. White Jesus, he has a lot of black jokes. One joke that he just said, and I'm like, damn. Shoot, I'm going to be a Muslim if White Jesus keeps talking like this. White Jesus said, what do black people, name 2 things black people have in common with bicycles and motorcycles. I'm going to write this up. I'm going to put this up on StreamYard. This is so awful. I'm going to repeat it. Name 2 things black people have in common Time is running out. Time is running out. I'm going to do this one more time. Name 2 things black people have in common with bicycles and motorcycles, says White Jesus. I don't know why I believe in him, but I don't know, maybe it's a cultural thing. Y'all give up? All right. White Jesus says the 2 things black people have in common with bicycles and motorcycles is we need chains and somebody to ride us. Help me, Holy Ghost. He had another one. This is terrible, man. We need a real reformation up in here. These attitudes. He must be the God of the evangelicals that Donald Trump and them be with. White Jesus told me another joke. He said, what did Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Dr. King have in common with Purdue's chicken farm? I'm going to write this out. This is... And black people be Catholics and shit. It's... Okay. I'm going to put this up there. Don't blame me. It's White Jesus. What? What did Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, I'm almost done. How was Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King? And if you're in Delaware, you know what I'm talking about. I'm about to tell y'all, because y'all not helping me. We'll put this up here. Yeah, I said y'all want to joke. Okay, one more joke. How was Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King like Frank Perdue's chicken farm? Y'all give up? He said that Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King were like Frank Perdue's chicken farm was they didn't have any ducks. Shit, I'm gonna put him away. That's enough. I'm not gonna lose my friends over this shit. Haven't y'all had white friends that would come around you and say really crazy shit because they think because you're friends they can say some real racist shit and almost get their asses killed? If you're white watching this, please don't repeat white Jesus jokes. I don't want to see your ass up on YouTube laid out somewhere. Okay? And I had white friends, they would always have like just nonstop nigga jokes. And then they meet the one black person that's been traumatized by racism from like deep south someplace, or they went to school, got beat up all the time, someone said something, and they just go beat the hell out of somebody, and then you couldn't be friends to them, right? I mean, but I see black folks that have white friends that don't respect them because there are some true white people out there that are true friends. I'm never going to tell you that all people in any group are bad. That's not what we do on this channel. Okay? I'm not like Fucker Carlson or these other people that just put all black people in a basket. I don't put all white. I don't. But racism's a reality. Now, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. We've been at this for a minute. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, for Juneteenth, I just got this book. It's Nikki M. Taylor's Brooding Over Bloody Revenge, Enslaved Women's Lethal Resistance. These are black women that had to delete their rapist slave masters. The first affirmative action program. In fact, this is some DEI shit I can get down with. Dirty European infidel. And they deleted their asses, and I'm going to read some of this tonight. And let me grab my thermos, because your throat gets dry. In fact, where my Jolly Ranchers at? I'm not supposed to have none. But, you know, I'm going to have me one of these so I can get through this. So, and some of y'all are still mad about white Jesus. He's all right. I'm going to get a black one soon, and whichever one wins the fight, he'll get to be my co-host. But I'm putting my money, because I'm in America, on white Jesus. Because, you know, You know where white folk coming from. Black people be iffy. I even think of Black Jesus. Like, that's probably how we ended up enslaved. Probably sold us out for some welfare cheese. Just kidding. Just kidding. Okay, so let me see. I'm going to read some of this. Again, this is Nikki M. Taylor. See this? And it's not that expensive. It's on Amazon Audible if you're lazy and you don't like to read. Look at this. Nikki M. Taylor, brooding over bloody revenge, enslaved women's lethal resistance. And I'm so excited. Let me get my thermos. I got my Jolly Ranchers. God, I love Jolly Ranchers, especially the cherry. Maybe it's because I'm a man. Y'all understand. Let me get my thermos. It's right here. Okay. That way we won't dry out. And, ooh. All right. Got my board. And let's get busy. Yes, Lord. Let me read the inside jacket. In fact, let me wet my whistle first. That's what white people say. Since we do everything that white people say, don't get mad. Good. Thanks. And you know how water is good? That's what Jesus told me. You know how you know water is good? When it's white. Okay. I'm going to lose all of my black friends over my white friends' jokes. Oh, God. Help me, help me, help me, help me. I hate when there's a piece of plastic in your mouth. I guess you ladies can relate to it's like a broken condom. I don't know, but I guess. Don't answer, don't answer. Don't answer. And probably bid down on that shit too. What did you think was going to happen? Anyway, I'm glad I live holy. From the colonial through the antebellum era, enslaved women. Hold on one second. Enslaved women in the USA use lethal force as the ultimate form of resistance by amplifying their voices and experiences, brooding over bloody revenge, strongly challenges the assumptions that enslaved women only participated in covert, nonviolent forms of resistance, when in fact they consistently seized justice for themselves and organized towards revolt. Nikki M. Taylor expertly reveals how women kill for deeply personal instances of injustice committed by their owners. The stories presented, which span centuries of legal context, demonstrate that these acts of lethal force were carefully premeditated. Enslaved women planned how and when their enslavers would die, what weapons and accomplices were necessary, and how to evade capture even in the aftermath. The original and compelling brooding over bloody revenge opens a window into the lives and philosophies of enslaved women who had their own ideas about justice and how to achieve it. Nikki M. Taylor is a professor and chair of the Department of History at Howard University, and she specializes in 19th century American history. This is her fourth book. This is from Cambridge University Press. Introduction. That justice is a blind goddess is a thing which we black are wise. Her bandage hides two festering sores that once perhaps were eyes. From the poem Justice by Langston Hughes. In Clark County, Kentucky, on January 23rd, 1812, Peggy Daniel, the wife of Captain James Daniel, was viciously attacked in their home by Charlotte, their enslaved woman. Peggy was holding the couple's 8-month son when Charlotte hit her with a block of wood. She then pushed her mistress, or female slave owner, and her baby headfirst into the fire blazing in the fireplace. According to the press, Peggy used extraordinary exertions to lift herself out of the fire, but each time Charlotte pushed her back into until she expired in excruciating tortures. That's a good way to deal with the feminists. After the murder, Charlotte tried to cover the crime by running to a neighbor's home in a panic, telling them that Peggy was unwell and needed their assistance. The neighbor got dressed and followed her back into the Daniel home. Charlotte, running ahead, rushed into the house and came back out with Daniel's baby, with its clothing still burning, saying the mistress had fallen into the fire. The papers reported that although the infant was badly burned, it survived. But Peggy's body was burnt in the most shocking manner. Because she had gone into the fire head first, her head and breast were completely incinerated. One of her arms was nearly burned into two pieces, and the other was reportedly an entire crisp. As shocking as it was, Charlotte's resistance revealed that enslaved women were not always willing to resist slavery covertly or nonviolently. Charlotte is, in fact, part of a large number of enslaved women who exercised lethal slave resistance in the United States. Charlotte confessed the murder and was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death in Winchester, Kentucky in February 1812. When asked by the judge if she had any reason to object to her death sentence, Charlotte, trying to save her own life, claimed to be quick with child or pregnant, a condition that would have automatically stayed her execution in Kentucky. In response to her claim, the judge impaneled a jury of 12 women to determine whether Charlotte was indeed pregnant. The jury, by the way, a feminist jury, your allies, pork chop feminists. The jury concluded she was not, so she was promptly hanged 5 days later on February 28th, 1812. Many of the enslaved women who, like Charlotte, made their decision to kill their owners suffered the same fate, a death sentence. This book is an effort to tell the stories of these women, particularly why they made the decision to use murder as the ultimate form of resistance to slavery. Although violent resistance to slavery was not the preferred form among enslaved women, the fact that it happened at all, and despite the constant surveillance and repression women endured, is what makes these actions remarkable. This book is concerned with those moments. Few historians have made this kind of resistance the subject of monographs. Melton McLaurin's Celia, a slave, and my own book, Driven Towards Madness, Fugitive Slave Margaret Garner and the Tragedy on the Ohio, And other articles about individual women who use violence to resist slavery are rare exceptions. Without stories like the one in this book, we are left with an incomplete, softened, or watered down understanding of black women's resistance to slavery. We must enrich and deepen this historiography by adding additional layers and complexity to enslaved women's resistance. It is hard to know with certainty how many enslaved women murdered their enslavers in the United States before 1865. According to David V. Baker, nearly 200 enslaved women were executed in the United States from 1681 to 1865. Most of those were executed for murder, attempted murder, conspiracy to murder, whites. However, Baker's estimate may be, come on, this is the thing about academics, this is low. May be too low. Local authorities suppressed news stories about these incidents because the publicizing such crimes could seriously threaten the social, racial, and gender order. Even Charlotte's own story was barely mentioned in the newspapers. Another consideration for the low estimate is the fact that in the colonial and early national eras, before the erection of separate judicial processes for enslaved people, owners resorted to their own brand of punishment or sale. Moreover, because several southern states offered justices the option of transporting convicted enslaved murderers to another region or county or country as punishment, counting the executions alone misses an entire group of women who were sold and transported for their crimes. In addition to the historical, social, and cultural barriers to obtaining the exact number of enslaved women who murdered their own owners or overseers, the archive has been lost, damaged, or destroyed. Many trial records about these capital cases have been lost to fire, water, and degradation, especially in the earlier eras. Other records have been simply misplaced or misfiled. Using Baker's baseline number to extrapolate between 1681 and 1865, hundreds, possibly more than 1,000 enslaved women committed or plotted to commit deadly violence against their owners. Even with that extrapolated estimate, it must be emphasized that compared to other demographic groups, enslaved black women were the least violent people in American society during the age of slavery. Let me say to you, one of the women in my extended family, and see, this is something that this lady didn't think about, got a slave master's son to kill his own father over her. So she got the dad deleted. Because women know how to get someone else to do shit that they want. She sure did get the son to kill the dad. She liked the son more than the dad, and let the son kill the dad. It happened down in Brunswick County, Virginia. So, girls got game. When enslaved women did sometimes murder their own owners, it wasn't not simply murder. It should be understood that as slave resistance. When enslaved women did commit murder in the colonial era, 92% of their victims were white. Working number. In his study, An Enslaved Woman in Capital Crime in Antebellum, Georgia, Glenn McNair found that enslaved women targeted their enslavers or their agents for murder, including their wives and children or overseers. They were less likely to seriously injure or harm other black Americans. He found that a higher percentage of enslaved women than enslaved men murdered their owners. According to them, enslaved men who murdered acted out of impulse or momentary anger. Women, he insists, used a higher degree of premeditation which made them more effective resistors ultimately. Women were better killers. Up until now, most historians of women's history have insisted enslaved women rarely chose armed, lethal, or overt forms of resistance. Excuse me. Stephanie M.H. Camp, for example, emphasized that they rejected explicit or confrontational violence in favor of covert, non confrontational acts of everyday resistance, which included insolence, disassembling, disobedience, feigned illness, absenteeism, work slowdowns, temporarily running away, and poisoning food. Women also resisted slavery by pretending to be pregnant or claiming that they suffered from debilitating menstrual issues that interfered with their work. Everyday resistance also included appropriating additional food, clothing, hair bows, and other luxury items from their unsuspecting owners. This form of resistance yielded many personal benefits, including reduced workloads, additional time off, or reassignment to different tasks. Despite the varied and creative ways enslaved women practiced everyday resistance, historians have categorized this as non threatening and less likely to undermine or challenge the social racial order the way a slave result would. Consequently, women's everyday slave resistance rarely ended in their executions, which meant it was the safer option. Not only has women's resistance to slavery been exclusively understood as the softer everyday variety, but has also been mischaracterized as it relates to collective and organized resistance. Historians have categorized slave revolts and uprisings as the preserve of men, leaving the impression that women rarely participated in collective, organized, violent acts of resistance. Women's participation within the histories of the major slave rebellions in the United States is not generally examined. When they are mentioned in these texts, they are relegated to the sidelines as mere witnesses or wives of the main organizers of these plots. Historians insist that the exclusion and marginalization of women was a conscious and deliberate decision made by the rebels themselves, who did not want to recruit women to join the front lines or leadership. Of course, for example, Douglas R. Edgerton insisted that Gabriel chose no woman for the inner circle of his 1800 Richmond plot. Historian James Sidbury, trying to explain why they chose no women in the same plot, suggested the conspirators may not have trusted black women. Yet Gabriel's wife knew about the plot, so they clearly trusted her. Sidbury concludes that women are missing from these plots because they were planning the masculine sphere. Historian Edward A. Pearson contends that Gullah Jack, one of the organizers of Denmark Vesey's plot in Charleston in 1822, excluding the enslaved women from the rituals. These historians do acknowledge the slave women knew of the plots, but portrayed that knowledge as accidental, if not incidental. For example, the one time James Sidbury mentions Gabriel Prosser's wife Nanny in his book, he states that she tried to recruit one man for the insurrection, but adds nothing else, so we are left assuming she failed in that endeavor. Pearson claims that enslaved women in Charleston inadvertently learned of Denmark Vesey's plan. Women, he concludes, had a shadowy presence in the plot. If we take these scholars at their word, then it would seem that enslaved women hardly ever participated in the revolts, or when they did, they played marginal chance or auxiliary roles. Consequently, slave revolts have been painted as a domain of men and uniquely revolutionary and decidedly masculine social movements. A few recent articles and books are challenging these long-standing beliefs about women's roles in slave revolts. In Surviving Southampton, African-American Women Resistance in Nat Turner's Community, historian Vanessa M. Holden offers a new way of seeing women's role within the history of major slave revolts. Revisiting Nat Turner's Rebellion, she illuminates site sources and strategies of resistance previously overlooked by historians. What do you mean as white male or white female historians? By so doing, Holden brings women, children, and free blacks into sharper focus. She asserts that women's gender roles often enhance the ways they could assist and do so undetected. For example, their greater mobility on specific farms involved in the rebellion led them to play significant roles in geographies of evasion and resistance. Holden discussed how women contributed to Nat Turner's rebellion by passing information, providing shelter and sustenance, helping rebels evade authorities, hiding weapons, and even physically restraining whites. The merit of Holden's book is that when it reveals the countless ways that women assisted and collaborated in the planning and executing of rebellions, brooding over bloody revenge also examines collective, violent uprisings, but posits that those led by women function differently than in the slave revolts which we are most familiar. Rebecca Hall's brilliant 2010 article, Not Killing Me Softly, African American Women's Slave Revolts and the Historical Construction of Racialized Gender, and a recent gripping graphic novel, The Wake, The Hidden History of Women-Led Slave Revolts Engenders a Problematic Historiography of Slave Revolts that assumes that women did not lead or substantially participate in them. In order to widen the lens to illuminate women who did, Hall defines a revolt as any violent, coordinated act of resistance that kills or attempts to kill slave owners or their agents. Her definition, plus historian Eugene D. Genovese's concept of simple revolt, which waits against an unbearable exploitation or the overstepping of traditional arrangements, are useful. I use a combination of Hall's and Genovese's definition to shape the contours how I use revolt here: organized, coordinated, violent, or lethal acts of resistance that are motivated by unbearable exploitation and injustice. This definition aptly describes the actions of the women in this book. I'm not going to wear this thing out. I want to get down to the story. You can read the rest of the introduction because you can get the book yourself. I want to get into the actual chapters. So I just gave you a taste of the introduction. How y'all like this? This is chapter 1. I'm going to try to do maybe I'm probably going to do 2 chapters of this, and I'm going to do something else. But I love this. God, I love this. Maybe I'll do 2 or 3. This is chapter 1, and this is Phyllis and Phoebe. On Sunday morning, June 29, 1755, Phyllis, an enslaved woman owned by Captain John Codman, prepared breakfast as usual. The wealthy captain was a merchant and slaveholder who resided in the town of Charleston in the colony of Massachusetts. A widower since 1752, Codman lived in the home with his children and enslaved people. Phyllis prepared his usual breakfast of a bowl of water gruel, oatmeal, and gave it to his 31-year-old daughter Elizabeth to give to her father. Codman, who had a history of stomach ailments, fell gravely ill shortly after finishing his breakfast. As his condition worsened, his children and enslaved cooks, Phoebe and Phyllis, tended him at his bedside with great tenderness and concern. The captain is said to have languished for 15 hours in his bed, suffering from convulsions. He died 2 days later on July 1st, 1755. According to the Boston Evening Post, upon examining Codman's body, Middlesex County Coroner John Remington noticed that the lower parts had turned black as coal. Perplexed by the unnatural state of his body, the coroner Remington held a coroner's inquest that began on July 2nd, the day after John Codman's death. After his cause of death came to light, the officials uncovered a diabolical conspiracy that dated back at least 6 years. Colonial Charlestown, Massachusetts was a port city located 2.5 miles north of Boston and separated from it by the Charles River. Both whites and blacks freely traveled between the neighboring cities of Charlestown and Boston for business and personal reasons on any given day, and slave people, merchants, or fishermen took the ferry to and from Boston, underscoring the connection between the two port cities. The economies of Charlestown and Boston both centered on trade, shipbuilding, fishing, and distilleries. But Boston was the more significant of the two. Let me just say to you that Sam Adams and other people were making gin and rum to fuel the slave trade. Sam Adams and these people were selling and making booze to give to people in Africa to get them to kill and enslave each other. And the Africans took booze. Booze was money to them. Oh, yes, it was. It was a major item of trade. And so, booze, which was made from sugar cane and molasses and so forth. I just want y'all to understand that. These people talk about up north and slavery, that everything in America around money has something to do with black people getting screwed. Always. By the 1730s, Boston had the distinction of being the most prosperous port in the British American colonies, thanks to slavery people. Among the many goods traded on Boston's Long Wharf and destined for other places in Massachusetts, other colonies in mainland North America, Barbados, the major, most important British colony where they had sugar, where they first had their big breakout economically. Slavery is the engine of American wealth. The abuse of black people. It's always there. Again, other colonies in mainland North America, Barbados, and even England. I'll read it all again. Among the many goods traded on Boston's Long Wharf and destined for other places in Massachusetts, other colonies in mainland British North America, Barbados, and even England. And I'm going to have to fix this here. She said were enslaved African men and women. She's not accurate. There was the slave trade of black Indians, like Crispus Attucks, to Barbados and the Caribbean too. Be very careful. I see now how she got to be head of the history department at Howard. Everybody's from Africa. I love Africa. Got African ancestries, and I got American Indian too. And if you've seen some of the Indians up in Massachusetts, some of them are darker than me, some are lighter. There was an extensive slave trade from New England to the Caribbean, and they were selling not black people, because New England never had a huge number of people brought from Africa. These were Indian people taken from warfare and other things. King Philip's War with the Narragansetts, and others. People lie. Get it right, lady. She was good, but I'm going to bust you if you didn't tell the truth. The earliest evidence of enslaved Africans in the Boston area can be traced to 1638 when a group arrived in the ship Desire. Still, slavery, listen, she says it right here, never became a dominant feature in Boston's cultural economy. No, you didn't need to bring slaves in, you had Indians there. Most Boston slave owners owned just one or two people as personal servants or artisans. Why? Because those places aren't big agriculture. The money tended to be on ag, cash crops. Soil isn't the same. The temperature. Although it's hard to find accurate census data from colonial Massachusetts, roughly 280,000 people reside in the colony by the mid-18th century. In 1754, when Governor William Shirley ordered a colony-wide census of enslaved people older than 16 years old, there were 954 of them living in Boston, which is Suffolk County, comprising roughly 5.6% of the city's estimated total population of 17,000. An incomplete slave census of Middlesex County, where Charlestown was located, recorded just 353 enslaved adults in that county. Yet together, Suffolk and Middlesex counties were home to the majority of blacks living in the colony of Massachusetts in the mid-18th century. Even before the American Revolution, slavery was on the decline in the area. In 1750, 80% of Boston's black community consisted of free blacks, most of whom reside in the city's north end. Boston's black community was consequential. Several black Bostonians in the colonial era would later make their mark in history. Future poet Phyllis Wheatley, future founder and first black Masonic Lodge Prince Hall, Elizabeth Brett Freeman, who successfully sued for freedom after the American Revolution, all lived in Boston in the 1750s. Great fluidity existed between Boston and Charlestown. Some enslaved people living in Charlestown had spouses and other family members living in North Boston, so it's not unusual for them to travel between the towns in both directions to visit their loved ones. John Codman's people, for example, regularly visited Boston's North End on errands to visit spouses and friends and for work and leisure activities. Black Boston, with its healthy and growing population of free blacks, offered Codman's enslaved people a taste of freedom. Perhaps it was after that taste that made them increasingly discontented with their owner. John Codman was born on September 29, 1696 in Charlestown, Massachusetts, to Stephen and Elizabeth Codman. Both of his parents died by the time he was 8 years old, so an older brother cared for him until adulthood. In 1718, John married Parnell Foster, the granddaughter of Mary Chilton, a pilgrim who had arrived from Europe aboard the Mayflower and who was reportedly the first woman to land at Plymouth. By this time, Parnell Codman had died on September 15, 1752. The couple had given birth to 11 children. A saddler by trade, Codman also worked as a merchant and sea captain. In these various endeavors, he managed to amass a great deal of wealth. His estate was valued at £6,000 in 1749, the equivalent of $1,385,000 today. This included a mansion, a ship, a forge, 7 enslaved people, 30 acres of land in Bridgewater, and 50 acres of land near Harvard College. Historian Lorenzo Green's research listed John Codman is among the leading slaveholders in the Massachusetts colony. Captain Codman was also an ensign or junior officer, and in the first and now oldest chartered military organization in the Western Hemisphere, the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company. Posthumously, he was described by elite local whites as a remarkably upright man, both in person and character, and is greatly respected. However, Codman's enslaved people did not think so highly of him as white elites in Charlestown and Boston. Same old hypocrisy, right? In 1755, Codman owned 7 enslaved people: Pompey, Cuffy, Scipio, Thomas, Phyllis, Phoebe, and Mark, all of whom worked as mechanics, common laborers, or house servants. Phyllis had grown up in the Codman household. In her late 30s, in 1755, she was described as the spinster servant of John Codman, which was a 17th century term to describe an unmarried woman. She and Phoebe were the only 2 enslaved women owned by the captain. According to Mark, Codman favored Phoebe and treated her better than the others. Phoebe was married to a man named Quaco. The couple did not legally marry, but they were recognized as husband and wife by contemporary black and white Charlestowners. The archive does not reveal how the 2 met or where they married. Quaco lived in Boston with his owner, James Dalton, who owned a restaurant. He sometimes spent his night and weekends with his wife in the Codman garret in Charlestown. Quaco had a long and notorious history, likely born in Africa to an African mother. Judging by his Akan name, he may have been transported in a transatlantic slave trade to the Dutch colony of Suriname, where he was enslaved most of his life. Quaco and a female accomplice had been accused of poisoning in Suriname. And Suriname, such people as Quaco, who poisoned and used knowledge of plants and herbs for evil, were called wise men by fellow enslaved people. Quaco's female accomplice was executed for the crime, but he was sentenced to transportation out of Suriname, which is how he arrived in Boston. In the 1755 Codman murder, it's the second time Quaco had been implicated in the poisoning. It would not be his last. In 1761, 5 years after Codman's death, a dying slave named Boston accused Quaco of poisoning him before he died. In that case, he began an argument over a woman between Quaco and Sambo, another enslaved man. Shortly after, Sambo's pigs were found dead, poisoned. Many enslaved people immediately suspected that Quaco had poisoned the pigs as revenge. Reportedly, he had felt betrayed when his own friend, Boston, took Sambo's side in the dispute. Boston then fell deathly ill, and before dying, he accused Quaco of poisoning him. Quaco escaped conviction and death sentence because the justice overseeing his case could not believe an allegation alone was enough to convict him of the crime. What this history reveals is that Quaco was a master poisoner who used his craft to exact revenge when wrong. He is perhaps the only enslaved person in that era who was implicated in multiple poisoning murders in the Black Atlantic and escaped the death sentence each time. Mark is the only Codman slave for whom there is more biographical data available, much of it provided in his own dying declaration, the last and dying words of Mark. Mark stated he was born in Barbados in 1725 and was sold as a child to Harry Caswell of Boston. In the colonial era, ships routinely traded between Boston and Barbados, so his transportation to the colony was not so unusual, but it was certainly traumatic to the young child who was permanently separated from his family and community. Mark's second owner, John Salter, was a Boston brazier, or brass worker by trade. Salter had had a transformational impact on the young Mark by teaching him how to read and write. Mark fondly recalls that Salter educated me as tenderly as one of his own children. In the colonial era, owners rarely taught enslaved people to read. Owners who recognized their enslaved people's humanity might teach them to read so they could read the Bible. Mark was a Christian, so being able to read the Bible was important for his spiritual growth. For reasons unknown, Salter sold Mark to Codman's unjust treatment of his enslaved workers was done with impunity. They had no one to appeal to for better treatment, realizing that they were powerless to change their owners' behavior themselves. Codman's slaves hoped that different owners would alleviate their suffering. The dilemma that they face is that they had no power to initiate their own sales to different owners, so they decided to force Codman's hand. Sometime in early 1749, Phoebe, Phyllis, and Marks designed a plan to burn down the blacksmith shop and workhouse. Phyllis claimed that the arson was Mark's idea, and he claimed that Phoebe masterminded this plan. Phyllis reported that Mark told the woman that he wanted to live in Boston, and if it was all burnt down, he did not know what the master could do without selling us. Both he and Phoebe had enslaved spouses in Boston, so they may have hoped that their next owners would reside in Boston so they could be closer to them. The arsonist calculated that the destruction of the blacksmith shop and all of his tools would lead to Codman's financial devastation and force him to sell them to new owners. Though Phyllis later admitted that she set the fire, she implicated Phoebe and Mark in the arson, testifying that Phoebe had prepared the shavings and coals for the fire and Mark had placed them in the shop for her. The fire set at 1 a.m. on June 12, 1749, caused extensive damage. Codman's blacksmith shop and several other buildings, a distillery and a brigantine dock nearby also caught fire, but escaped serious damage. The captain's damage were estimated at £6,000, a near total loss for him. That's all of his money, guys. But they had grossly underestimated their owner's financial resources. The fire did not force Codman into financial ruin as they had expected. In fact, he did not sell a single slave after that fire, not one. Codman could never figure out that his own enslaved people were responsible for it, although he may have had his suspicions. In the colonial era, fires were remarkably common, and most were not the work of arsonists. Phyllis, Phoebe, and Mark held the secret between them until 1755, when Phyllis admitted to officials that she had committed the arson. Because of the 1749 arson did not result in their sale, as they had hoped, Phyllis, Phoebe, and Mark decided to kill Codman. Consistent with the black feminist practice of justice. Feminists. Murder was the last option for them to free themselves of Codman for good. Their decision to kill him suggests that they did not think that he was redeemable or capable of reform. He had to die. The conspirators, though, seem to have spiritually conflicted about whether they should commit a murder as Christians. Phyllis recounted that Mark read the Bible to be sure that it was not sinful to kill a man. According to her, Mark concluded that it was no sin to kill him if they did not lay violent hands on him so as to shed blood by sticking or stabbing or cutting his throat. Or so he thought. Somehow Mark missed dozens of biblical scriptures that forbid the shedding of blood, including the sixth commandment and the one that reads, "Curses anyone who should kill their neighbor secretly." That's Deuteronomy 27 and 24. which would have covered secret killing of someone with poison. However, the most biblical statements in the murder condemn the shedding of innocent blood or killing righteous people. Mark may have concluded that because Codman was neither innocent nor righteous, his murder was justifiable. It was Codman's just deserts. The trio decided that poison would be the best way to kill him. Quaco's history of poisoning is not inconsequential to this case. He may not have given his wife the idea and instructed her as to which poisons to use. Phoebe, Phyllis, and Mark believed that it was a possible way to get away with the killing of their owner with poison because it had previously been done with success in their own neighborhood when John Salmon's slaves killed him with poison and got away with it. Not only were Salmon's enslaved people never suspected of his killing, but they ultimately ended up with what the conspirators conclude were good masters. This gave Phoebe, Phyllis, and Mark a successful poisoning model, and they may have even sought the advice of Salmon's people. Their comment about Salmon's people getting good masters after his death suggests that freedom from slavery was not their ultimate goal, just obtaining good masters. This logic is consistent with that of other enslaved women who had killed their owners. Their actions were more a moral condemnation of Codman than slavery itself. Phoebe, along with her husband, Quaco, masterminded the poison plot. Although Mark insisted that he was nothing more than Phoebe's and Phyllis's pawn, the evidence implicates him for being actively involved in obtaining the poison. As a male, hired his time and traveled to and worked and lived in Boston, Mark had greater mobility and access to a wide network of enslaved people who worked for apothecaries or doctors and could readily access poison. Robin, enslaved by Dr. William Clark in North Boston, procured poison from her owner's business and became a frequent supplier of arsenic to disgruntled enslaved people. Mark later admitted that he initially told Robin horrid lies to get the poison, including telling him that he needed to kill 3 pigs. After that initial lie, Robin did not appear to question Mark about why he needed so much arsenic. Sometimes Robin took the ferry to Charlestown and delivered poison to Mark, and other times Mark ferried to Boston to pick it up from him. In the last month of Codman's life, Phyllis said that Robin had come to the house in a black wig to describe himself, obviously nervous about being identified by anyone in Charlestown. Another enslaved person's supplier was Kerr, who was enslaved to Dr. John Gibbons in Boston. Kerr typically sent the poison to women through Phoebe's husband, Quaco. Phoebe had made the trip to Boston to collect the poison directly from Kerr at least once. Even Mark had recently received poison from Kerr at least twice. But in June 1755, Kerr was no longer willing to provide any more arsenic because Phoebe had told him that she was poisoning someone in the Codman home, and the revelation made him nervous. When the arsenic proved too weak to finish Codman off, Mark obtained some lead and pottery glaze from Essex, who was enslaved to Thomas Powers. What is interesting is that all of these enslaved people knew Codman was being poisoned, and most of them participated in the plot or facilitated it passively or actively. Not one of them betrayed the plot before his demise. On some level, they surely believed that he deserved what was coming to him. Folks can't keep stuff silent today. Although Mark procured the poison, Phoebe and Phyllis administered it to Codman in his food and drink. For 2 years, the woman fed the captain a array of poisons, including arsenic, ratsbane, which is rat poison, potter's lead, and possibly raw cashews, which contain urushiol, which can be fatal if ingested before boiling. These women were quite knowledgeable about the poison's efficacy and potency, even how to administer each kind without detection. For example, the people that interviewed Phyllis determined that she seemed to have thought the lead was efficient poison compared to arsenic. She knew a great deal about rat poison. Phyllis confessed that when Mark gave her ratsbane, she discerned that it was just only burnt alum and not real ratsbane. She doubted its authenticity because she knew that when people took ratsbane, they generally would swell. The master did not swell. Phoebe agreed with Phyllis's suspicion about the counterfeit ratsbane. The fact that the women knew the effects of rat poison suggests a high degree of familiarity with the effects in humans. The men were just as knowledgeable about the poisons. Robin had told them that arsenic should be dispensed in cold water because it would have no taste. He also instructed them that if used with swill or Indian meal, it would make them swell up. Moreover, he had also advised Mark to give a vial of arsenic in 2 doses, directions the trio apparently failed to follow. Quaco's own history proved that he knew about using poisoning to harm or kill. Women's strategy was to kill Codman slowly over time. Phyllis claimed that it's when Robin learned that they had not followed his instructions. He said that they were damn fools because they were not given to Master and the first powder at 2 doses, for you would have killed him, and nobody would have known who hurt him, for it was enough to kill the strongest man living. The larger enslaved community possessed extensive knowledge of palliative and medicinal herbs, plants, and deadly poisons. Women in particular learned the different uses for any given plant. Collard greens, for example, could be eaten or used to cure headaches by tying the leaf to the sufferer's head. Particular plants could have a dual function: to alleviate illness or to murder. Jimson weed, for example, could be used to treat headaches, asthma, or dropsy, or to kill someone. In 1841, in St. Augustine, Florida, an unmarried enslaved woman, along with Jake, an enslaved man, poisoned the entire Hyde family by putting the seeds of Jimson weed, a corruption of Jamestown weed, into their coffee. Every part of Jimson weed is extremely toxic if ingested, but especially the seeds. Ingesting as little as 15 to 25 grams of the seed can be fatal. The Hydes were immediately sickened after drinking their coffee, so it was obvious that the enslaved cook had poisoned them. The pair were promptly arrested. They confessed the following day and were executed shortly thereafter. As that case demonstrates, there's a thin line between using plants to heal and using them to kill. Practitioners could do both. Chelsea Berry found that in the West African language Igbo, phrases for preparing medicine, practicing sorcery, and neutralizing poisons are similar. Giwo or Oguwo to prepare medicine, Ko Oguwo to practice sorcery against, and Ro Oguwo to neutralize effective poison. Among the Akan speakers, the word Aduru means medicine and poison. In spite of the striking similarity of the root words and verbs in traditional West African languages, enslaved people in colonial America understood the difference. Slave owners were equally fearful of the medicinal knowledge and practices of enslaved people. As Berry asserts, unsanctioned medical practice by enslaved people was extremely threatening to slave owners, especially when used as a form of resistance. Because poison was done in secret, slaveholders had to live in fear that with every bite of food they took, every sip of drink could lead to their death. That persistent, gnawing anxiety prompted some colonial authorities to legislate against enslaved people's medicinal practices. Colonial Virginia, for one, made the practice of medicine by enslaved people a capital offense punishable by death. Let me just stop and say the same sorts of things happen today, that they don't like us using herbs and things, and they give us this deadly big pharma poison and so forth. We can take care of ourselves if we wanted to. The cultural knowledge of African and African American medicinal practitioners, and they didn't mention black Indians, but because Africa, okay. They held about plants, roots, herbs, and fruits must be distinguished from the knowledge about deadly poisons and chemicals. Plants mostly nourish, heal, or cure, although some can also kill, as demonstrated above. Manufactured poisons and chemicals, by contrast, always harmful when ingested or when contacted with the skin. Enslaved people possessed a sophisticated knowledge about both categories and where they overlapped. At times, weapons of enslaved people used to poison their owners were common household cleaners and products. For example, in 19th century Louisville, an enslaved girl asked a vendor for something to kill flies. The vendor was clearly accustomed to enslaved household workers procuring insecticide, so her inquiry did not raise suspicion. Unfortunately, the flies this girl sought to kill were her owner's children. She mixed the insecticide with molasses and gave it to the children to drink. All three children immediately fell ill but did not die. In 1859, in Richmond, Virginia, an enslaved girl obtained oxalic acid from her mother, who was enslaved 63 miles away in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Oxalic acid, then and now commonly used to remove laundry stains, was widely recognized as toxic and required hand washing after contact. As a product used in laundering, her possession of oxalic acid would not have raised any alarms. The young girl mixed the poison in her owner's water and gave it to him to drink. Although when mixed with water, oxalic acid is colorless, the slave owner noticed that it tasted acidic, so he did not finish the drink. Rather, he set it aside to be analyzed by a chemist. Had he finished it, he would have suffered severe gastroenteritis, vomiting convulsions, metabolic acidosis, and kidney failure. Ingesting as little as 10 to 15 grams of oxalic acid can be fatal. Enslaved people's access to and shared communal knowledge of herbs and poisons allowed them to wield social capital and power that could be used to resist oppression and decide whether their oppressors were maimed or died. They even chose how much or how long their owners suffered before dying. The fact that the weapons were often common plants grown in nature, homegrown cleaning agents, insecticides, or raticides, made it difficult to prevent these types of crimes. In June 1755, Phoebe and Phyllis increased the poisoning dosage. On June 13, 1755, Phyllis received a tiny package that consisted of a white piece of paper that had been folded into a square and tied with twine. Inside the carefully wrapped package was nearly 1 ounce of white powder. She transferred the powder into a tiny vial, added water, and stored the concoction in Codman's kitchen cupboard. For the next 2 weeks, she and 2 other people in the Codman home, Phoebe and Mark, seasoned his food and drinks with the arsenic mixture. When the arsenic failed to do the job, the duo added powders led to Codman's poisonous meal seasonings. As the only people responsible for the family's meals, Phoebe and Phyllis possessed unlimited power to determine how and when the poison would be administered. Although Codman's daughters lived in the home, they were not responsible for preparing meals for the widowed father. Phoebe and Phyllis poisoned Codman's meals, snacks, and drinks, even tea infusions he took for his lung issues. They mixed it into his barley drink, breakfast, water gruel, tea, and even his favorite luxuries such as chocolate drinks, and sago, a type of pudding made from pith, the starchy center of the sago palm grown in Barbados. It also seems that the Codmans were not so vigilant as they could have been. They never discovered the mysterious vial of arsenic in the kitchen cupboard, nor did they notice how the meals had changed in taste. There was not one complaint. No, there although there was a complaint about the water gruel tasted gritty. On occasion, though, Codman's daughters expressed curiosity about the food, asking the cooks what was the black substance in the porringer or why the water gruel had turned yellow. The fact none of the Codmans ever suspected that poison was at the root of the patriarch's health issues underscores how deeply the family trusted Phyllis and Phoebe. Poisoning is characterized by historians as secret or covert slave resistance because it was done secretly and did not directly confront the slave owner's power or result in freedom. People assume that this form of covert resistance also was nonviolent. It is anything but nonviolent. The poisons that Phoebe and Phyllis used guaranteed a violent reaction in John Codman's body. The symptoms of arsenic poisoning included blood in the urine, stomach cramps, seizures, vomiting, diarrhea, and organ failure. The symptoms of high levels of lead toxicity include stomach pains, cramps, vomiting, muscle weakness, and seizures. Mark reported that his owner suffered from a racking pain in his belly. According to reports in local papers, Codman was seized with an exquisite pain in the bowels. In addition, he seemed to have suffered convulsions in his last few days of life. Poisoning should be recategorized as a form of armed resistance due to the extensive damage it does to the human body. The genius of using poison to murder someone is that it can be masked as a chronic illness, as it was in the case with Codman. Shortly after his death, Abigail Greenleaf wrote a letter to her brother, Robert Treat Payne, who was Codman's friend. Captain Codman departed from this life yesterday, having been ill with colic ever since you drank tea with him. In the 18th century, colic, with stomach pain as its primary symptom, would have been a presumptive diagnosis because it was very common among adults then. It was not until 5 years later in the 1760s that a physician researcher, Sir George Baker, discovered that lead poisoning caused the colic. Of course, by then, John Codman was already dead. The fact his symptoms could have easily been mistaken for a chronic illness illustrates how remarkably disciplined Phyllis and Phoebe had been during the dosing amounts. Phoebe and Phyllis did not kill their owner suddenly and elicit immediate suspicion. Instead, they murdered him piecemeal over several years. If they were to get away with his murder, people needed to believe that Codman had died of a chronic illness. This is the likely reason the women were so disciplined and resisted the impulse to administer the poison in larger doses. Phyllis revealed that Phoebe sometimes had put more poison than she should and that her hand was heavy when she added it to her owner's food and drink. Phyllis argued against using too much poison at once, likely concerned that a quick death would make people suspicious. Phoebe subsequently scaled back the poison, regardless of whether Codman suffered a while or died instantly. As a white, wealthy man, his untimely death would raise questions. Unfortunately, black women cooks were the objects of suspicion even when such people died of natural causes. In this case, however, the evidence is conclusive that Phoebe and Phyllis murdered John Codman and were assisted by Mark and various other enslaved men. When the Middlesex County coroner, John Remington, began his autopsy on the Codman body on the day of his death, the captain's lower back extremities gave him pause. Remington suspected poison because of the hyperpigmentation as a sign of chronic arsenic toxicity. Upon cutting Codman's body open, Remington reported that some of the deadly drug was found undissolved in his body, which 'tis said was calcined lead, such as potters use in glazing their ware. Massachusetts coroners could hold an inquest and impanel a jury comprised of white, free, male property owners to assist in the questioning and cross-examining of witnesses. Remington formally began a coroner's inquest on July 2nd, 1755. At least 4 members of the jury belonged to the same family: Samuel Larkin Jr., Thomas Larkin, and John Larkin, underscoring how much the cards were stacked against Codman's enslaved people from the beginning. Quaco, Phyllis, Robin, and Mark were arrested and held in the local jail. Suspicions about Mark's culpability were confirmed when the coroner's justices searched the property and found the potter's lead that Mark had hidden in a wall plate or candle sconce in the blacksmith's shop. It looked similar to the lead found in Codman's stomach. The arsenic was never found, but once the lead poison was discovered inside the blacksmith shop where Mark worked, no lie would help him escape a certain execution. The inquest jury concluded that Mark poisoned Codman. The jury assumed that the women were innocent. A grand jury was convened shortly thereafter in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Middlesex County. Quaco was questioned by the County Justice of Peace on July 12th. He said he had only found out about Mark's efforts to acquire poison. Quaco claimed that when he did learn of it, he told his wife not to become involved. Since his wife was the ringleader, it is unlikely that Quaco had only recently heard about the plot, as he claimed. Given her husband's history as a poisoner, Phoebe certainly had consulted him, but Quaco had learned a lot from his poison conviction in Suriname, including how to avoid the same mistakes that had led to his discovery, conviction, and transportation. This time, he simply claimed he knew nothing about it. That strategy worked for him. Phyllis and Mark, in that order, were then questioned by Prosecutor Thaddeus Mason and Attorney General Edmund Trowbridge. Had the women feigned ignorance of the plot, they might have gotten away with murder after all. Neither had the reputation Mark had for roguery and defiance. But the trio's bond had been broken the day the poison was found in Mark's possession. Phyllis, whose testimony began on July 26, fingered Mark as the mastermind and Phoebe as the primary poisoner. Phyllis admitted to participating in the conspiracy but minimized her own role, testifying that she only mixed the poison into the food a few times. She blamed Phoebe and to a lesser extent Mark for the actual poisoning. Phyllis told the inquest jury that she often felt ugly as a reference to her conscience about what they were doing, which led her to throw away the tainted food several times instead of serving it to her owner. Phyllis provided all the details about how they procured the poison, how the poison was served, and their motive. The transcript of this interrogation is the only surviving record of the woman's perspective of the crime. By the time he was questioned, Mark had already been named as a mastermind by Phyllis and possibly Phoebe as well. Regarding Phoebe, Mark testified that she had visited him in jail to desire me not to confess anything, for they could not hurt me. She might have been trying to plead with Mark to keep quiet so they all could escape the convictions and death sentences. Perhaps she calculated that without the testimony of the 3 of them, the authorities would not have enough evidence to convict. Regardless, Phoebe left the jail uncertain about where Mark stood and doubtful about whether he would confess. In that moment, she might have believed that she could no longer trust him because of his bitterness towards her was becoming nearly palpable. She might have decided to betray Phyllis and Mark to save herself from certain execution. According to Mark, Phoebe was the evidence in behalf of the king, which means she testified against him for the prosecution. This claim was later corroborated by the founding father, Dr. Josiah Bartlett, in his book, A Historical Sketch of Charlestown in the County of Middlesex and Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Phoebe, who is said to have been culpable, became evidence against others. She was never interrogated, arrested, indicted, tried, or convicted of the murder she had masterminded. Mark tried his best to convince officials that the woman had killed their owner and that he had no foreknowledge of their plot, despite admitting that he had given them poison several times. When asked by the prosecutor why he had had potter's lead in his possession, Mark lied and said he was testing it to see if it would melt in our fire. When he asked if he had a reason to suspect that the poison he was supplying to the woman was being used to poison his owner, the reply was no, other than the reason hearing Phoebe, the Saturday night before the master died, asked Phyllis if she had given him enough, which she replied, yes. If I'd given him enough, I will stick to as close to him as his skirt to his back. But who she meant I did not then know, nor until after Master died. Mark claimed multiple times he only learned of the plot after Codman's death, when he had confronted Phyllis and she had admitted it to him. At the end of his testimony, Mark signed his deposition, an act of agency that underscored his literacy and ability to construct his own historical record. Using those interviews as evidence, a grand jury indicted Phyllis, Mark, and Robin on August 5th, 1755. Instead of murder, Phyllis was indicted for petty treason, an English common law statute, 25 Edward 3C2, that dated back to 1352, that made the murder of a social superior a capital offense. This legislation was designed to protect the social hierarchies in England and New England by severely punishing three distinct groups: servants or slaves who killed an owner, wives who killed husbands, or a member of the clergy who killed a superior. Convictions under petty treason in colonial New England dictated that women be burned to death and men be drawn to the place of execution and there hanged. Phyllis's indictment stated she had acted of malice and forethought, willfully and feloniously, traitorously, to kill, poison, and murder the said John Codman against the peace of the land of the Lord and King and his crown and dignity. Robin and Mark were named as accessories. The indictment stated the men did traitorously advise and incite and procure and abet the said Phyllis to do and commit the said treason and murder. Mark was charged only with an accessory to Phyllis's petty treason. Despite her prominent role, Phoebe was not indicted, a fact that gives credence to the idea she may have betrayed her co-conspirators. Despite their prior confessions during the coroner's inquest, both Phyllis and Mark pleaded not guilty at their arraignments. For his part, Robin's charges seem to have been dropped by the time Phyllis and Mark were arraigned. The judicial system for enslaved people faced in colonial Massachusetts, a society with slaves, was different from what they might have experienced in slave societies. For one, they were not subjected to separate slave courts. Enslaved people had their cases heard in the Superior Court of the Judicature. Based on the principles of the Magna Carta, colonial Massachusetts prohibited death sentences without the process for anyone, including enslaved people. Enslaved people enjoyed the right to a grand jury, legal counsel, legal challenges, and juries. They had the right to have their indictments read to them and to testify in court, except against whites. The pair's trial commenced on August 6, 1755, in the Superior Court of Judicature in the Court of Assize in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Chief Justice Stephen Sewell and Associate Justices Benjamin Lind, John Cushing, and Chambers Russell presided over the trial. The historical record is silent on whether the justices owned enslaved people. Neither defendant was provided with a member of the clergy to counsel them, owing to an English law that dictated that those charged with intentional premeditated murder would be denied that right. More than 20 witnesses were subpoenaed to testify for the prosecution against Phyllis and Mark, including 6 Codman children. The rest of the Codman slaves, including Pompey, Thomas, Cuffy, and Scipio, also received subpoenas. Multiple other enslaved people also testified, including Essex, the servant of Thomas Powers, a person enslaved to Dr. Rand, Dinah, who belonged to Richard Foster, and the servants of John Gibbon and John White. There's no extant record of their testimonies. Interestingly, Phoebe received no subpoena despite her extensive intimate knowledge of the plot. White people sometimes served as proxy witnesses for enslaved witnesses and testified in court about what their enslaved people told them directly. The long list of prosecution witnesses was insurmountable for Phyllis and Mark's defense. Phyllis and Mark were convicted of the charges of petty treason and sentenced to death. Their death warrant, signed by Richard Foster, the Middlesex sheriff, scheduled their execution for September 18, 1755, between 1 and 5 p.m. The death warrant for Phyllis indicated that she was to be drawn from our jail to the place of execution, there be burnt to death. Phyllis's sentence was exceedingly harsh, but it was a prescribed sentence for petty treason. Mark's death warrant that he was to be drawn from our jail to the place of execution and hang upon the neck until he be dead. To be drawn meant he would be dragged by a horse across the ground. Although it was typical for men to be drawn to a place of execution in the colonial era, this practice was rarely used on women. In that way, as a woman, Phyllis was dehumanized and subjected to a level of public humiliation typically reserved for men. While being dragged, there would be no way to stop her dress from going up. Women, without exception, wore dresses in colonial America, exposing her private areas. Massachusetts changed the mode of women's punishment for petty treason from burning to hanging in 1777 and ended the charges of petty treason statute altogether in 1790, too late to benefit Phyllis. Phoebe was condemned to be transported to the West Indies for her role in the murder. On the eve of his execution, Mark wrote a dying declaration. His is one of the few surviving dying declarations written by enslaved people in the colonial era. By the time he wrote his declaration, he was consumed with resentment that Phoebe had not received her just deserts, so he exposed her true character to the white Charlestowners. He expressed contrition and regret and admitted his role in the poisoning death, but insisted that the woman had enticed him to get the poison. Referring to the 1749 arson, Mark claimed that he had nothing to do with it, claiming to have been sick in bed when the shop was set afire. He accused Phoebe of thievery when the shop burned. She wickedly stole some of the clothes thrown out of the window to be saved, and to my certain knowledge, she was a great thief. Mark continued, she stole money from my master, 100 pounds in money, part of which I believe to be in Phoebe's sister's hands. There's no way to determine if his accusation is true or merely a final ploy to get Phoebe in trouble. In this version, his last, Mark provided details different from those he had previously shared with the coroner's inquest jury about the days preceding Codman's death. In his dying declaration, he claimed that when one of the other enslaved people in the home had asked Phoebe how their owner was faring on his deathbed, she referred to him as the old dog and promised that she would stick as close to him as the shirt on his back. And not only so, she would cut down the old tree and she would hew off the branches, a chilling reference to killing Codman and then his children. Mark had previously testified that Phyllis was one who made references to sticking close to Codman as his shirt on his back, but later attributed those words to Phoebe. He also recounted that although Phoebe had sat at Codman's bedside with his children as he lay dying behind his back, she celebrated his impending death and mocked his suffering. Mark claimed that as their owner lay dying, Thomas and Phoebe gleefully rejoiced at his impending death. When he was in the bitter pangs of death, Mark alleged that after having witnessed Codman's convulsions, Phoebe got to dancing and mocking the master, shaking herself and acting as the master did in bed. He claimed that Thomas reportedly told others that he did not care what happened to the owner and hoped that he would never get up again. Mark painted Phoebe as a conniving, heartless thief and monster. He also implicated Quanco insisting that he was knowing in this affair as I was. Mark's dying accusation had no effect. Phoebe was never indicted for Codman's death, and there's no record of her having been transported from colonial Massachusetts, much less out of British North America. She got away with murder. Testifying against one's fellow conspirators was the only way black women could proactively escape executions in colonial America. As Mark's dying declaration reveals, he felt a deep regret and harbored resentment towards Phoebe on the eve of his death. For Phoebe's part, by turning the state's evidence on her co-conspirators, she had escaped the death penalty and instead was condemned to transportation. By contrast, Phyllis accepted her fate, admitted her role in the crime, and repented for it before man and God, and apparently felt peace within herself before execution. Unlike Mark, she made no bitter pronouncements, failed to implicate anyone else, and refrained from accusing Phoebe of additional crimes. The difference between how Mark and Phyllis responded is that Phyllis admitted her guilt and was resigned to accepting the consequences of her actions. On September 18, 1755, Phyllis and Mark were drawn and executed at the gallows in Cambridge, not far from Harvard College, now Harvard University. According to the Boston Gazette, the executions were attended by the greatest number of spectators ever known on such an occasion. Britain's 1752 Murder Act denied convicted murderers the right to a church burial unless they had received a post-mortem punishment. The irony of a post-mortem punishment is that the offender was not alive to experience it. Instead, the person's family and community witnessed the horrors of the desecration of their body. Hanging a corpse in chains, whereby the corpse was placed in a gibbet or cage-like structure and displayed in public as a deterrent to others, had been popular in England, but its usage peaked in the 1740s. After the passage of the Murder Act, the anatomical dissection was the most common post-mortem punishment in England until 1732. By contrast, gibbeting was less common. Britain's North American colonies only rarely followed the mandate for post-mortem punishment. When they did, they preferred gibbeting to dissection. However, in the English Caribbean, gibbeting was used as a form of torment and execution, with the convicted person being placed in chains while still alive. After Mark was hanged to death, his body was prepared for an impromptu gibbeting, although he had not been officially condemned to a post-mortem punishment. Local officials made the decision to hang Mark's body in chains, possibly to satisfy local demands. Gibbeting was a gendered practice limited to men. Consequently, Phyllis escaped this gruesome post-mortem punishment. After his hanging death, Mark's body was measured and fitted for a gibbet. This gibbet was then quickly constructed. Once his body was placed in the irons, the gibbet would then be raised 30 feet or more above the ground, too high for anyone to remove the corpse. Customarily, bodies were hung in chains as close as possible to the actual crime scene. Popular attractions or spectacles for local travelers alike, gibbets were placed at crossroads of popular landmarks to maximize the number of people who saw them. Mark's body was hung in chains at the Charlestown Common, about 10 yards from the gallows or town square. Locals intended to keep Mark's body hanging in gibbets until the elements or the ravages of birds of prey would pick all the flesh from his bones. For those who lived near the gibbeted body, the stench of the decaying corpse could be unbearable, as were the rodents, scavenging birds, and bugs it attracted. There was no specified time that the bodies would hang in giblets. Many, like Mark, remained for decades and became local landmarks. The remains of Mark's body hung in that gibbet for at least 20 years as a chilling local landmark. Dr. Caleb Rea, a traveler who lodged near Mark's gibbet in 1758, remarked that the skin was very little broken even after a few years. Paul Revere, recounting the events of his famous ride in April 18, 1775, to alert American colonists that the redcoats were approaching, referenced that he nearly was overtaken by them where Mark was hung in chains. It is not clear when Mark's corpse was ultimately removed. By the mid 18th century, British society, which had invented this grisly practice, found that the prolonged public display of decaying and dismembered bodies for decades distasteful, if not only incomprehensible. Gibleting became increasingly less popular, and the mainland North American colonies, especially, fading as a practice after the American Revolution. On the same day Mark was hanged, Phyllis was burned at the stake. The difference between hers and Mark's mode of execution is a reminder that Phyllis was considered one of the masterminds and far more dangerous than him. Being burned at the stake or burned alive was typically reserved for the most vicious and unrepentant murderers in colonial America and beyond. Rarely was it ever done to a woman. Even the women convicted in the Salem witch trials were not burned at the stake like Phyllis. In spite of the prolonged gibleting of his body, Mark at least died instantly. Phyllis, on the other hand, was tortured slowly. Burning someone at the stake is a particularly sadistic and designed to inflict intense suffering. Historian Kento Swan, who wrote Sally Bassett's Burning in Bermuda in 1730, reminds us of the visceral nature of such a scene of horror. It would have affected the scenes of those who witnessed it. Phyllis's unnatural wails and screams of anguish would have pierced the air, echoing from the commons to the Charlestown streets, alleys, and homes. Would have It would have been impossible to miss or ignore in a town that size, even for those who did not want to attend the event. Those present would have witnessed Phyllis's physical responses to the pain of fire destroying her flesh. Her body must have twisted and convulsed in agony. Spectators would have seen her flesh melt from her bones as the flames consumed her. The combination of smoke and burning flesh, hair and bones, would have been noxious to smell. We will never know whether the spectators were gassed or covered their eyes and noses. Did they wince in horror or revel at watching her slowly burn to death? Did they cheer or pray for her soul departed? We will never know. What we do know is that Phyllis' mode of execution says more about the inhumanity of the society in which she lived as an enslaved woman than it does about her humanity or final act of resistance. Despite the fact that Phoebe and Phyllis conceived, planned, and led this act of resistance, prominent historians have reduced them to background players in Mark's plot. In reality, it is Mark who was charged and convicted of being only an accessory in Phyllis's plan. Mark has been given the mantle of leadership by historians because he was male, and some are incapable of imagining enslaved women as leaders of slave revolts. In historians' defense, Mark's gender and literacy did make him loom large in the historical record, but the inability to see the outsized role that women plays corrupts history. The Codman case illustrates black women's capacity to organize and execute lethal collective actions against abusive slaveholder, and in Phoebe's case, escape the consequences. Every aspect of this case reflects the black feminist practice of justice. Codman's enslaved people initially wanted more humane and just owners. Their arson conspiracy did not result in their sale as they had wished. When that plan failed, Phoebe and Phyllis handed Codman a death sentence, if for nothing else than enslaving, abusing, and denying his enslaved people their humanity. Murder was their last best option to remove themselves from his authority. The conspirators were remarkably patient, killing him slowly over 6 years. They delighted in his suffering and privately mocked at his weakest moments. To these women, prolonged physical suffering was an essential part of Codman's just desserts. This is what they felt he deserved. Phyllis was only the second enslaved woman executed this way in the colony of Massachusetts. Maria, who was burned at the stake in Boston in 1681 for arson, was the first. According to the ESPY database of executions in the United States, only 12 black women were burnt at the stake in the entire slave era. Other women were sentenced to be burned alive, were either convicted of arson or poisoning murders. Enslaved men, by contrast, were far more likely to be burned to death during the age of slavery. And the colonial era alone, 32 black men met that fate. Phoebe and Phyllis were not the only enslaved women convicted of using poison to kill or attempt to kill their owners in the long American history of slavery. In January 1751, across the Charles River, Phyllis Hammond was accused of poisoning death. That Phyllis was a 16-year-old girl owned by prominent apothecary Dr. John Greenleaf and his wife Priscilla. Priscilla had given birth to 3 children, all of whom died as toddlers within a short span of time. The death of the last Greenfield child, their only son, John Jr., caused them to believe it was not fate playing a cruel joke, but a human culprit who had prematurely ended their children's life within days. Phyllis was arrested for the death of the 11-month-old John. The Boston Evening Post reported that he had been killed by arsenic and ratsbane. The paper noted that Phyllis also confessed to having previously poisoned the Greenleaf's 15-month-old daughter. Young Phyllis was hanged May 1751 for those crimes. Certainly, Phoebe, Phyllis, and Mark had heard about that story and may have even personally known young Phyllis, given how much time they had spent in Boston. They also would have known that she was hanged for the alleged crime. The fact that they knew the harsh consequences of poisoning in colonial Boston and still persisted in their plan underscores how much they were willing to risk to ensure Codman's death. The Boston area poisoners were not alone. In the colonial era, hundreds of enslaved black women were convicted of and executed for poisoning their masters. For example, January 10, 1738, Bess, an enslaved woman owned by John Beale of Prince George's County, Maryland, PG, was accused of attempted murder. Poison was her weapon of choice. Bess was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death in March and was hanged for that crime, June 7, 1738. On March 20th, 1738, Judy of Queen Anne County, Queen Anne, Maryland, was executed for poisoning death of her overseer. In 1747, Prince George County, Virginia, Abby was accused of poisoning her owner, Dr. James Tyree. She escaped a certain execution by hanging herself in her jail cell. In Charles County, Maryland, Charles County. My family's been in Charles County since 1633. In Charles County, Maryland, July 1755, the same year of the Codman's death, Jeremiah Chase and slave worker Jenny tried, convicted, and executed for the conspiracy to murder him by poison. And Anne Arundel County, Annie Arundel County, Annie Arundel's my grandmother. Annie Arundel County, Maryland, Tida was accused of attempting to poison her owner, Ephraim Glover, on February 1st, 1757. She was executed for an alleged attempt on April 7 that year. An unnamed enslaved South Carolina woman owned by Mr. Fickling was hanged on January 14, 1761 for poisoning him. In Calvert County, Maryland, Lord Calvert, my grandfather, Calvert County, Maryland, Calvert County, Maryland, two enslaved people, Rachel, owned by John Hamilton, and Samuel, owned by William Hickman, were accused of attempting poisoning Mrs. Smith some years ago. They were both hanged on the basis of suspicion, October 15th, 1761. Curiously, in that same county, 3 years later, three additional enslaved people were convicted of the same crime of attempting poisoning what may have been the same victim of Mrs. Smith and her husband, William Smith. This time, Betty, Sambo, and Joe were executed June 20th, 1764, for alleged attempted poisoning. In 1772, an enslaved woman named Judith Harrison was hanged for poisoning in Brunswick County. That's one of my ancestral counties, Southside Virginia. Hey, Brunswick. I told you people, my folk are crazy. Brunswick County, Virginia. Judith Harrison hanged for poisoning. Early national history, Nash County. Oh, Nash and Edgecombe County. Those are my counties again. Nash County. Okay, northeastern Carolina. These are all black belt counties. Black belt Virginia, black belt Maryland, black belt North Carolina. Learn about it. Here we go. Nash County, North Carolina. An enslaved woman named Beck was tried and convicted of poisoning two men in the Taylor family, including Henry Taylor and his two sons, Henry Jr. and Samuel. In North Carolina in 1800, Sue, owned by John Coates, was convicted of poisoning William Cook and his family. On January 28th, 1803, Chastity Lawson was hanged for poisoning her owners in Virginia Beach. On February 28th, 1806, Antebellum, South Carolina, Eve was convicted of administering poison to her owners in 1829. 3 years later, Rena and Fanny Dawson were executed in the crime of Prince Edward County, Virginia, on January 5th. Later that same year, 1732, this is Nat Turner time the following year, Lucy, an enslaved woman, and the Bolinia family in Jefferson County, Louisiana, was hanged for poisoning. Aurelia Chase was hanged December 20th, 1833 in Baltimore, for the same crime. On January 12th, 1849, two enslaved women in Brunswick County, Eliza Griffin and Roberta Ezel, were hanged for poisoning. In 1851, Miley Fox was executed in Louisiana. In September 1854, Thibodaux, Louisiana, an enslaved woman was accused of putting arsenic in her owner's food. Mr. Rawlings, her owner, suspected he had been poisoned, so he allegedly gave the food to a dog, which killed the animal within minutes. Rowland then allegedly consulted a chemist who confirmed that arsenic was in the food. In 1857, an enslaved girl tried to poison the entire slave patrol in New Kent County, Virginia. Woo! Get down, ladies. By pouring muriatic acid in a liquor decanter kept for their entertainment. She confessed and was convicted for the crime. In 1859, Lucy, an enslaved woman belonging to the Araminta Moxley in Prince William County, Virginia, who reportedly was also the daughter of Moxley's late husband, Gilbert, poisoned the entire family with arsenic. Araminta died immediately, and Lucy was convicted and executed for her murder on April 22nd, 1859. Lucy cited poor treatment as her motive. September 7th, 1860, Franklin County, Kentucky, Francis Berry was hanged for the crime of poisoning. Later that year, in Louisville, Kentucky, Watts Clement reported that 5 of his enslaved people, including 2 women, had put poison in his family's milk. One of the most interesting instances of enslaved people's use of poison as a weapon against suppressors in American history was when it was used in revolt plots. In May 1805, whites in Wayne County, North Carolina, uncovered a widespread plan to revolt. Having been inspired by the Haitian Revolution, the conspirators planned to use poison to kill all the powerful white men in the region. All of those men were dead. The plan was to subdue and enslave the remaining whites. Dozens of enslaved people were implicated in the plot. However, the very first person to be convicted of it was an enslaved woman who was accused of poisoning her owners and 2 others. Like Phyllis, she was burned alive. One observer noted that several enslaved men were hanged, and one was pilloried, whipped, nailed, and his ears cut off on the same day for their roles in the plot. It is nearly impossible to know with certainty if these other enslaved women actually poisoned their owners were just suspected of it. For enslaved people, the result was the same: execution. Often the only information historians have about these poisoning cases was the nature of the conviction, the names and dates of the execution. Unlike Phoebe and Phyllis' case, only a few of these other incidents have surviving records of their trials, court testimonies, or confessions. Surely all manner of unexplained or sudden sicknesses before the 19th century were attributed to poisoning and blamed on enslaved people who prepared the food. In fact, even food poisoning, which is very common now, was even more so in the era before refrigeration, 1851, and pasteurization, 1862. Likely would have been blamed on enslaved people. David V. Baker's estimate that as many as one-third of the enslaved women executed for poisoning had not actually poisoned anyone, but the cases stemmed from food-borne illnesses instead. For example, Orange County, Virginia. I know Orange County. In January 1746, an enslaved woman named Eve was convicted for the murder of her owner, Peter Montague, who became gravely ill in August 1745 and had finally died December 27th of that year. Before dying, Montague indicated that he had fallen ill in August because he drank some milk. He came to suspect that the milk had been poisoned by Eve. With milk at the center of the case, many doubts are raised whether Montague had in fact been poisoned at all. Before pasteurization process was developed in 1862, consumption of raw or unpasteurized milk was extremely dangerous because it contains a harmful bacteria cocktail including Brucella, Campylobacter, E. coli, that's a doo-doo one, Listeria, Salmonella, and Cryptosporidium. There's a possibility that one or several of those bacteria caused Montague's extended illness, suffering, and death. Regardless, like Phyllis and Eve, was drawn to the site of her execution and burned alive at the stake for the murder, real or imagined. The vast majority of those people charged with poisons before 1865 were enslaved people. On a micro level, 100% of those convicted of the poisoning in antebellum Virginia were black. Consequently, poisoning accusations became associated with black Americans. Aside from being race, poisoning accusations were gendered. Black women were more likely than women to be convicted of using poison for murder during the slave era. In fact, 71% of the blacks convicted and executed for this crime were male, contrary to the popular belief that women were the ones who poisoned the food. And colonial Maryland between 1726 and 1775, 67% of the enslaved people convicted of poisoning were males and just 33% were women. Similarly, in antebellum Virginia, black men comprised 60% of those executed for poisoning, and 40% were black women. In South Carolina, between 1824 and 1864, 9 enslaved men and 2 women were arrested for poisoning. Hence, although the poisons were one of the prevalent methods of enslaved women to use to murder their masters and oppressors, men used it as a deadly weapon more often. Women only account for 1/3 of all the executions of enslaved people for poisoning before the Civil War. Although the death penalty was not applied evenly for men and women in every state, the data does suggest men were more likely to get caught, at least the very least. Regardless, along with arson, poison was the most common weapon enslaved women used to commit murder as the top crime for which they were convicted and sentenced to death. In the end, the secret, powerful, deadly weapon of poison is the one thing that terrified slave owners daily. The more cruel, violent, and abusive ones had good reasons to fear that every bite of food or sip of drink could lead to their untimely demise through the intentional act of revenge. Sometimes revenge was served cold by enslaved women. That's the end of chapter 1. What y'all thinking? How do y'all feel? Talk to me. Because I can stop. What time is it? It's almost 12. I can get back and do some more. Can I change books? But I have this, so we can come. But what y'all think? What y'all think about that? All of those people poisoned and getting killed. Mm, that wasn't a bad chapter. Happy Juneteenth. We still got a little bit of time in the day. I was just thinking I had these other books. Oh, I have a couple of these. Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, I know that they had something around Black Wall Street. Someone had 100th birthday or something. Um, I'm going to show you something. I want to stop for a second, and I'll do another one of these tomorrow. I have a really good one. Hey, y'all, this is a worthwhile book to get. It's called the 1910 Slocum Massacre, an act of genocide in East Texas. This happened near where it's called Palestine, Texas. A black man beat a white man out for a job, and the whites came and killed maybe 600 black people over a black person getting a job. White folks came from all around the area, so they hunted and just killed black folks. Well, can I switch books? I like, because sometimes you get tired. You get tired of how a person writes. I can't explain it to you, but you get annoyed. And, sometimes people are too wordy. They could, make it shorter. Let me see, how long is this one? Oh, this isn't bad. This is, don't want to do this one. Hold on, let me see something. I'll find something. Hold on. I want to get one with somebody like, mm, mm, I love this. Let's, yeah, this is a nice short one. This starts at 60. That's long though. I like this one. I'm gonna try another. I'm gonna do chapter 6. Okay, I'm gonna skip over. I want to do something slightly different. Okay, we're still in this book. Let's do chapter 6. I like this one. This is Virginia. I love Virginia, and it's not that long. On top of that, last night I burnt something, and that smoke just, I got some Ricola. Ricola. Have you ever seen dudes, snow kings, and they get around white girls, they Ricola, like that's gonna impress them or something? I'm gonna have me one of these Ricolas. May as well. I'm in chapter 6. Chapter 6, Brooding Bloody Revenge. This is Nellie, Betsy, and Ellen. We concluded to get rid of him. Revenge is simply justice with teeth. On the evening of December 24th, Christmas Eve, 1856, Dr. Jesse Ewell, the acting coroner in Prince William County, Virginia, arrived at George E. Green's farm. Green, a bachelor, had been found dead in his burning home by his neighbors, who then summoned the coroner. Dr. Ewell noted that all was visible or remaining of Green's body was the charred spine and pelvis of an adult human body. In other words, Green's clothing, flesh, and muscles, and most of his bones had been consumed by the fire. Dr. Ewell arrived at the property on Christmas Eve. Cold weather and the time of night prevented Dr. Ewell from doing an investigation that evening. How many of y'all have retweeted this room? The numbers are down. Retweet this. Come on, y'all. Retweet, share. Come on. This is more than 10 people. Like. How many people have liked this? That's one thing to tell me. It's another thing when I look in comments. Sometimes I may get 5 or 6. Normally I don't get any. Make comments, like, just don't be an idiot. The cold weather and the time of night prevented Dr. Ewell from doing a further investigation that evening. But the following morning, he returned to Green property and resumed his work, recounting the details of his investigation. He discovered a spot in the road, much trampled and smoothed over, with traces of blood near the barn. He noted that the trail of blood led to the spot to the house, which to him appeared to be the result of a body having been dragged, marked also by spots of blood at intervals. Looking around the property, the coroner found additional clues, illuminated the circumstances leading to Green's untimely demise. He wrote, the yard gate had had one of the slats broken. The catch, which had held the latch, was split off. The cap was one of those gate posts that was broken off and split, and the gate had other marks of violence on it. It was clear to him that someone had murdered George E. Green. During the violent struggle in the front yard, his body was dragged to his home and then set on fire. Prince William County, Virginia, was developed on land occupied for centuries by the Anacostan, and in D.C. we have an area called Anacostia. That's a group of people. The Dueg, Iroquois, Piscataway, that's one of mine, peoples. In 1649, the exiled King Charles II of England granted several noblemen the northern neck or Fairfax Proprietary, which roughly consisted of all Virginia lands from the Potomac to the Rappahannock rivers. More than 20 Virginia counties were carved from that land tract, including Fairfax and Prince William counties. Prince William County, named after King George's son, Prince William, was officially established in 1731 on 2,000 square miles of the northeastern corner of the colony, bounded by the Occoquan River on the northeast and the Potomac on the southeast. The county is roughly 35 miles south of Washington, D.C. It most certainly is. Prince William's first county seat was in Dumfries, Virginia. The sale and shipment of tobacco became central to the booming economy of the town and the port city on the Potomac River. Dumfries' population and prosperity increased well into the 19th century. Haymarket, Occoquan, and Brentsville became rival to Dumfries as high population centers in William County in the early 18th century. Their growth coincided with a steady population decline in Dumfries. Consequently, the county seat was moved to the more populous Brentville in 1822. Tobacco was the king in Virginia in the colonial era. The crop precipitated the economic growth in Prince William County's waterfront communities, generating a great deal of wealth for its planters and even those who transported tobacco to other regions or across the Atlantic. Tobacco was so central to the colony's economy that it became the economy. At one point, tobacco was even used as currency to purchase goods, to pay taxes and salaries, and to satisfy other debts. Just as tobacco was central to the regional economy, too were the enslaved people who worked the fields. Tobacco exhausted rich soil of the Chesapeake region over time. By the early 18th century, the effects of soil exhaustion meant a precipitous decline in tobacco farming and production. Many tobacco farmers left the region for the virgin soil of lands further west. Others remained there and adjusted by switching to different crops, grains. By the 19th century, wheat, oats, corn, and other grains replaced tobacco as the primary cash crop in the region. Prince Williams County's farmers also sold hay and butter. By 1850, the county boasted of a fledgling economy, including 19 flour, grist, plaster, and sawmills, plus cotton and wool factories. In 1850, a railroad reached the town of Manassas. The county also boasted 13 churches and educated 316 students in its public schools. In 1850, the population of 8,129 included 5,631 free people, including free blacks. The enslaved population of Prince William County the same year was 2,498, or 31% of the total inhabitants. A decade later, Prince William County's population of 8,213 included 2,356 enslaved people. Prince William County's 350 slaveholders each owned an average of 6.6 enslaved people in 1860. They were largely small, middle slaveholders who worked alongside of and personally managed their enslaved and hired workers. In addition to the 2,356 regular enslaved people living in the county, Prince William County farmers hired 202 enslaved workers from other counties. For example, James Havener hired 15 enslaved people owned by J.B. Robertson of Alexandria to work his farm. Similarly, Alexander Hollyclaw hired all 16 of his enslaved workers from William Gaines, who resided in Warrenton, Virginia. By far, the biggest slaveholder in the county was William James Ware, who owned 80 people who worked on nearly a 1,600-acre plantation. Was the second biggest slaveholder in Prince William County, and a few years before the Civil War was Edward Berkeley, who had owned 52 enslaved people. Ware and Berkeley were exceptions rather than the rule. Prince William County farming was dominated by small slaveholders, many of whom could never hope to become planters. People like George E. Green. George E. Green had been born in Prince William County in 1802 to Sarah and James Green. He had at least one brother, James, who was 9 years younger. George was a farmer and a slaveholder, but also a school teacher who held classes on his farm. George owned 9 enslaved people, including 5 males and 4 females, by 1830. 2 decades later, in 1850, he and his brother lived together and owned 7 enslaved people, which appear to be 3 generations in one family that included Nellie, age 54, and her husband, age 53, and their 38-year-old daughter Betsy, and Betsy's children, 9-year-old twins Ellen and Elias, and 11-year-old son James, also known as Jim. There was one other unidentified enslaved 21-year-old male residing in the Green property who may have been Betsy's oldest son. According to the 1850 census, George owned real estate valued at $3,570. That's $121,000 today. His brother James' real estate was valued at $169,000 today. By no means was either brother wealthy, By 1856, George E. Green lived alone on a 238-acre farm 6 miles outside of Gainesville, Virginia. The biographical record of George E. Green before Christmas Eve, 1856, is quite thin. He cohabitated with his younger brother, or lived near him all of their lives, much like Henry Orman. George never married and he had no children. Y'all know what I'm thinking. Y'all know what I'm thinking. You know what I'm thinking. You know what I'm thinking. Physical descriptions made of him indicate that when he was 54 years old when he was murdered. A neighbor testified that he suffered from diseases, but was a pretty stout man who weighed about 160 pounds. He was described as tall with tolerably good muscles. He had been observed working on his farm regularly when able. Other than the physical description, Green was more historically invisible than his enslaved people. Ironically, this white slaveholding male only became visible in the record as a result of the actions of his enslaved people. The enslaved family Green owned had been with him at least 6 years, if not longer. They likely worked planting staple crops for their sustenance, such as potatoes and corn. Green also raised peanuts for profits, which the family would have been responsible for planting and harvesting. The women would have also served as house servants. Elias, one of the twins, was described by John B. Grayson as the most intelligent of the set. He was perhaps Green's most trusted worker. Elias had been trusted to drive his owner's 4-horse wagon alone to deliver peanuts and crops to the railroad station 8 miles away. Elias, with his trusted position, enjoyed higher mobility than his family members, but that personal privilege did nothing for his loved ones. Apparently, it did not guarantee his loyalty to Green either. Although Green's farm is not listed in the 1850 non-population census, aka the Okay, so he didn't make the farm census. Based on the extrapolation from other farmers in his vicinity, it is likely that he grew corn, oat, and wheats. Working on grain farms with few hands, Nelly's kins would have had an exhausting work regime, year-round from sunrise to sunset. 6 days a week, farm work on the whole was hard, labor-intensive, seemingly endless for Green's enslaved people. Although large groups of enslaved people were ideal for growing grains, small farmers such as Green expected his smaller workforce to do the same volume of work. With such a heavy workload, Nellie and her kin would have worked from sunrise to sunset. In the summer, the workday could end as late as 8 p.m., which left little time for leisure activities or personal time. The only thing that made the work bearable is that what they did together as a 3-generation family. Nellie claimed that Green refused to allow them to leave his farm. His refusal seemed to have been his misguided attempt to stifle any independence while maintaining total control over his enslaved people. With the exception of Elias, Nellie and her family members were not permitted to leave the farm, which meant they were isolated from the rest of the slave community of Prince William County, Virginia. Green denied them small privileges that other enslaved people could expect, including the right to visit friends and loved ones on other farms, attend parties and dances, church services, and even go to the market or waterfront. In the trial that was later held, one of Green's neighbors, Luther Lynn, stated, Nellie told him that Green had never let them go to a meeting, reference to a church service. This family was significantly more confined to the farm than other enslaved people in the neighborhood. Neighbors also observed that Mr. Green always had his gun convenient where he could put his hand upon if any noise occurred at night. He would go out and shoot low on the ground. Surely such behavior was intended to deter his slave people from sneaking off the property after dark. Knowing that Green used his gun to deter them from moving around at night underscores the family's grievances about not being free to ever leave the property. Nellie also complained that her family was not getting enough food to eat. You can grow up, but you can't have any. Slaveholders usually gave weekly food rations to their enslaved people, which in Northern Virginia in the antebellum era consisted of cornmeal, salted pork, or some other meat, and vegetables. Nellie complained that Green did not provide any meat, not even salt pork. Austin Stewart, who was born and enslaved in Prince William County, Virginia, in 1793, recalled in his biography that weekly food allowances consisted of one peck of corn, some salt, and a few herrings per person. Stewart wrote that they were given very little meat except on special occasions. Smaller slaveholders in Prince William County, such as Green, gave their people just enough to keep them alive, productive, and fairly healthy. Meat was a luxury most small farmers could not afford to give to enslaved people. Interestingly, though, when the inquest jurors searched the quarters of Nellie and her kin, they found a collection of food including 2 pieces of bacon, 2 spare ribs, sausage meat, some lard, some smart sugar, coffee, and probably 20 pounds of sugar and some molasses and tea. Obviously, that list of food was far better in quality and quantity and diversity than even the favored enslaved people the wealthiest planters possessed. So, more than likely, Nellie and her family had removed these items from Green's home after his death. They went shopping. In terms of the work regime in the Upper South states, most enslaved people worked 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday. Owners released them early on Sunday so they could enjoy their Saturday evening and Sunday. Enslaved people looked forward to this time off on the weekend, but Nellie and her kin were denied even that. In addition to carrying the field workload sunrise to sunset, Nellie and her daughter and granddaughter had additional chores inside Green's home. Pounding corn to make cornmeal, cooking, cleaning, and washing for the bachelor. Being denied free time was dispiriting for enslaved people. It was one of their most valued things besides family. With free time and permission to leave their farms, they could attend parties and dances on Saturday evenings and religious services on Sunday. Historian Eugene D. Genovese indicates that all except the most unfeeling masters threw parties and dances on Saturday or allowed their enslaved people to attend parties elsewhere in the neighborhood. Let me stop for a second. Look at how they use entertainment then and now to keep us accepting bullshit. Because Green did not allow his people to leave his property, they were denied such privileges. This is the world Nellie and her kin inhabited, a very small one, which did not extend past Green's property line and where they had little and to no reprieve from work. On Christmas Eve, 1856, as he lay in front of his workplace, Georgie Green's home was invaded by unexpected but familiar visitors. His visitors were members of the enslaved family he owned: 15-year-old twins, Ellen and Elias, their older brother James, their 44-year-old mother Betsy, and the family matriarch's 60-year-old Nellie. They did not come bearing Christmas cheer. The family decided this Christmas Eve would be Green's last. Ho, 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 niggas. Considering how Green liked to shoot his gun if anything stirred in his yard at night, it had been a grave risk for the family to attack him, but because they knew about his gun, they made sure he didn't have a chance to grab it. After they entered his home, Betsy and the children jumped on him and tried to tie his hands and feet. The children held his legs down. Ellen got one leg, Elias the other. Betsy and James tried to tie the hands, but Green fought back, so they were unable to completely tie him. After the grandchildren and daughter held Green, Nellie struck him with an axe several times. He struggled to get free, caught one of her blows with one of his hands, and wrestled the axe from her. Then he used the axe to ward off further attacks for a while. With the axe in hand and bleeding from his injuries, Green managed to flee from the home, running for his life. I'm running for my life. I'm running for my life. That's the song they sing in church. I'm sorry. I'll stop. He was hotly pursued by Nellie's family. They chased their owner to the yard, determined to execute their plan and him. Green swung the axe at his pursuers, and one of the blows struck James in his head. Another hit the gate. Green took off running towards his field, but unfortunately for him, at 54 years old, he was outmatched by younger, stronger, swifter legs. The family caught him and beat him with shovels and axe and sticks and fence rails until they killed him. Let us break bread together on our knees. Psych. Elias later admitted that he had used a shovel to hit his owner and also stabbed him with the piece of a nail. With the exception of the axe as the weapon the family used, were not things that one would reasonably call or consider deadly weapons. But to enslaved people intent on lethal resistance, any household item could be weaponized. Once Green was dead, Nellie's family dragged his body back to his home. Apparently, they cleaned up the blood with rags, took meat from Green's icebox, and some clothing from his wardrobe before setting fire to the home. They returned to the quarters where they removed and hid their bloody clothing, along with the axe and the rags, and under the beds. In one account, the family pretended to sleep when the neighbors responded to the fire. All of Green's neighbors reported that his home was nearly completely consumed by the time they arrived, and indicated it had been burning for a while before anyone outside the property noticed. Green's neighbor, George B. Taylor, Gustavus Hutchison, Luther L. Lynn, and their enslaved people arrived at the scene, first at 8:30 p.m., having noticed the fire. They lived in close proximity to the Green farm and obviously knew him rather well. Tyler's 1,000-acre farm, where he raised wheat, rye, corn, and oats, was located a half mile from Green's. Like Green, Tyler was a small slaveholder who owned just 8 people. Tyler testified he rushed over to Green's after one of his own enslaved women alerted him that Green's house was on fire. By the time Tyler got there, at least a dozen enslaved people from the neighborhood were already present, including 3 of his own, 3 of Hutchison's, and 2 or 3 of Lynn's. Tyler reported that when he arrived, he asked Elias about Green's whereabouts. Because Green lived on his farm, naturally the only source of information would have been his enslaved people. Elias responded that he was in the house, implying that he was in the fire. Tyler then followed the question with another, asking the boy why his owner had not escaped. Elias responded that he did not know. Tyler stated he asked about Green's whereabouts again, this time directing his question to the crowd. Peter, one of his own enslaved people, pointed to the fire without any verbal response. Tyler then saw Green's body himself, and he asked Nellie how the home caught fire, and she explained she did not know and that some of them were asleep and others on the bed when they came out. The house was falling in. Luther L. Lynn, another Green neighbor, on the scene after the fire. Like Green and Lynn, Unlike Green and Tyler, Lynn was a farmer who raised wheat and corn on his 429-acre farm. A slaveholder himself, Lynn owned 9 people. In 1860, he recounted that his wife had first seen the fire and had woken him from his sleep to alert him. Lynn dressed immediately, mounted a horse, and rode over to the Green farm. He also asked Green's people what had happened. At this point, the neighbors' questions were just normal inquiries curious people make after a tragic death. It was not until Eliza, a woman belonging to Gustavus Hutchinson, was questioned at the scene that anyone explicitly articulated the belief that Green's enslaved people were responsible for their owner's death. Uh-oh, somebody snitched. Eliza stated that when she went to Green's slave quarters and called for Nellie and the kin to come out, they came out of the door, looked at the fire, and went back inside. She implied that they were neither alarmed nor surprised by the fire. According to Eliza, when she asked Nellie and her family why they had not tried to save their owner, they did not respond. Eliza then offered a damning conclusion. It is my opinion that something wrong had been done. In other words, she believed the family had done something to Green. A feminist. Oh my God. A feminist. Beware of feminism. Feminist. Damn. A feminist. A feminist. According to Tyler, Green's body was burned up, and the skeleton could not be recognized as the body of Mr. Green, or tell whether it was a white or a black man. Tyler sent his own man, Peter, to Green's alias to summon the other neighbors and possibly coroner, Dr. Jesse Ewell, who had arrived shortly thereafter and began his inquest. Dr. Ewell owned a farm in Green's neighborhood where his 24 enslaved people raised corn and oats. He was called because in Virginia, coroners typically carried out investigations or inquests when people died under unusual circumstances or when murder was suspected. Dr. Ewell may have been somewhat nervous when he arrived at Green's property for good reason. This was the first time he had ever acted as coroner. Coroner Ewell interviewed Nellie's family and walked the property looking for clues that he could find in the dark. He then examined Green's remains, which consisted of his charred spine and pelvic bones. Anyone that saw the scene was shocked by the extent of the disintegration of the body. Normally, the body would need to burn at 1,000 Fahrenheit for 2 or 3 hours to cause the majority of the body's bones to disintegrate in this way. The fact that Green's spine and pelvis remain is because the bones do not burn evenly. The higher density ones burn last. Given the late hour, darkness on the scene, and frigid temperatures, Dr. Ewell left quickly and tended to conclude to investigate the following day. Tyler, Hutchinson, and Lynn remained on the property for an hour or two and agreed to return 9 a.m. on Christmas morning. The following morning, Coroner Ewell and Green's neighbors and their enslaved people returned to the farm. By then, Luther Lynn stated the dogs or something had turned the remains of the body around some 3 feet and found the back part of his head, his hips, shoulders, and his entrails all connected together. Ewell recruited Green's slaveholding neighbors to serve on the coroner's inquest jury. This action sealed the fate of Nellie and her kin, regardless of their guilt or innocence. Those men could not have acted impartially because they were Green's friends and immediate neighbors. Nevertheless, they immediately got to work investigating, examining the body and the scene, and searching for clues that might have been responsible. Inquest jurors began with what remained of Green's body and found his keys and watch. They determined he must have still been dressed when the fire began because he was clearly wearing his watch and had his keys in his pocket. They followed the traces of his blood leading from his house for about 150 to 200 yards. On that path, they found evidence of a bloody struggle in one spot, so they concluded that Green had been murdered. Tyler testified that when they arrived the previous night, all three of the women Green owned had blood on their dresses. In the middle of the investigation, Mr. Norris, a member of the inquest jury, accused James of the murder because he had a fresh 2-inch wound on the crown of his head, and that was so deep as to cut the bone. This impromptu accusation was not an unusual inquest juries. James initially proclaimed his innocence. Then another neighbor turned inquest juror asked Nellie what she hit her owner with, and she responded she had done it with an axe. Lynn instructed her to retrieve the axe. He claimed that she retrieved the bloody axe from under one of the beds, but Constable Patty later claimed that it was he who had found it and he had searched in the quarters. Their conflicting statements underscore how little care was taken to record the evidence was found and who found it. Never confirmed the axe belonged to one of her two grandsons. An inquest juror found the jacket had a hole in it under another one of the beds in the slave quarters. Lynn asked Nellie who the jacket belonged to, and she replied it was James, which he confirmed. James was told to put on the jacket and to verify that it fit him. Lynn then matched the hole in the jacket to the wound on his back and concluded he had been injured the previous night while wearing it. Lynn later testified he had examined the clothing of Nellie and the family. They were all found more or less bloody except Elias. I don't think any blood was on his. There was found the jacket, which is said to be his, in which there was blood about the sleeves. After investigation, the evidence was collected and completed. Dr. Ew and the inquest jury then formally interviewed Green's enslaved people. How y'all like this? It's a family affair. It's a family affair. It's a family affair, guys. The whole family got down on him. Dr. Ew interviewed a total of 7 people for his inquest: Nellie, James, Elias, 2 of the Hutchinson people, Newman and Eliza, George Tyler, and Luther Lynn. Nellie, the 60-year-old matriarch, testified first. After she was sworn in as a witness, Dr. Ew asked her to tell him everything she knew about Green's murder. She admitted that the family had murdered him. Nellie felt perfectly justified too. He, quote, he, meaning said Green, was a hard master. He would not give us enough to eat. He would not allow us to go from home, nor give us any of the privileges that other people's servants had. He told us that we should stay home during Christmas holidays and work. 3 of these 4 grievances Nellie mentioned are related to personal liberties that made slavery somewhat bearable, especially in that time of year. Christmas holidays included time off between Christmas and New Year's. This break was not only a festival time, but it offered much needed mental and physical break from the hard work schedule. Enslaved people engaged themselves in this festive work season by activities such as decorating a tree, having parties, and visiting friends and kins. On neighboring farms and plantations, gift giving was an essential feature of the holidays. Owners generally gave their enslaved people Christmas presents, which might include tobacco, ribbons, extra food, or even cash. Holiday parties lasted into the night, featured singing, barbecues, whiskey, dancing, music, and revelry. For those in bondage, although the year brought many denials of their basic humanity and human rights, Holidays were a time of restoration for their souls and psyches and reaffirmed their humanity. They eagerly anticipated the holidays and the free times with loved ones. Most owners accepted this generation's old tradition. Even brutal owners would at the very least provide a 3-day break for the festivities. Depriving enslaved people of their holidays altogether was considered cruel and mean spirited. Denying them their holidays, coupled with denying them privileges of movement throughout the year, was exceedingly heartless from their perspective. Within the context, it is clear why Green's enslaved people found their treatment unjust and opted to exercise their own justice. According to Nellie, we concluded to get rid of him. Stewart went on providing details of how they murdered George Green the previous evening. When I went in the house, the others, meaning Betsy, James, Elias, and Ellens, had held him down on the floor and tried. I gave him one crack, meaning a blow, and I believe it was with that axe. I cut one of his hands, and he caught the axe and got it away from me. He got out of the house. I did not follow him. The others did. Two of them dragged him back to the house. I don't know which of them. Now his confession matched the evidence on the scene. She was remarkably unflinching and unhesitant in her commitment of the truth, despite the life or death consequences for her and her kin. She proceeded to implicate every single member of her family, even the children. The next person to testify in the coroner's inquest was James, Nellie's oldest grandchild, who was 18 years old at the time based on data from the 1850 slave schedule. According to James, he, meaning Green, was hard upon us, and we could not do anything to please him. James essentially stated that Green was an exacting and overly critical master. An owner who could not be pleased made it impossible for them to take pride in their work. It was a hopeless prospect. James then repeated that the same grievances iterated by his grandmother. Nellie said, he said, we should work through Christmas holidays. We decided to burn him up. According to James, Green was lying in front of the fire when they went inside the home. We got on him and tied him. He got out of the house. We struck him with the shovel and pieces of the fence rails. Although Nellie said she was unsure about how Green came to the end, James clarified it for the inquest jury. Elias, the 15-year-old twin, echoed the same justification for the owner's murder. He would not let us have a holiday. The fact that three of the Nellie's kin expressed a denial of a holiday as a primary reason for this murder underscores the significance of the season in their lives. Elias also adds a new detail to the murders. He indicated that Green was knocked in the head before he was dragged to the kitchen and set on fire. Neighbor George P. Tyler provided the most comprehensive testimony during the inquest. He gave many details about the night of the murder from his perspective as a slave owner and a witness to the events after the fire. He recounted the confessions of Nellie and her kin. He said that Nellie had admitted that they had done it, meaning the 5 prisoners, that he had been a hard master and they were tired of living with him. Granted, Tyler with only one to have heard the part of the confession when she stated that they were tired of living with him. It does not have a ring of truth. It is consistent with the spirit of Nellie's own confession. Tyler's testimony provided other essential details about Nellie's confession. Quote, she said that they went into the house and cussed at him. She said at first she struck him with something, she didn't know what. Finally, she said it was an axe. She then said the deceased got up and ran out of the house. They pursued him with shovels, axe, and sticks until they killed him. As he was going out of the house, he got the axe from her, and Elias struck Jim with the axe after killing him, dragged him back in the house, and set on fire. But it said nothing about what occurred in the house. Tyler observed that James and Elias' testimony was substantial what old Nellie had said. However, he did recall that Ellen and her mother said Betsy claimed that they knew nothing about Green's murder when questioned. It is doubtful that they knew nothing about it, but perhaps Betsy and Ellen had feared that confessing to the murder would lead to a death sentence, so they lied to save themselves. The final person to testify before the inquest jury was Luther Lynn, who testified on the night of the fire that he remembered asking Nellie had she gone to bed at the time it started. According to him, she responded she had not noticed the fire until the roof was collapsing. Then asked if she heard Green yell for help. She responded, no. At the conclusion of the inquest, Dr. Ewell charged all 5 of Green's enslaved people with having willfully and deliberately, with malice and forethought, killed and murdered the said George E. Green on the night of the 24th of December, 1856. He drafted a warrant for their arrest. Constable B.F. Patty took the family, the bloody axe, and James Jackson jacket to the county courthouse in Brentsville. Coroner Ewell's inexperience compromised the integrity of the inquest. In a letter to Philip D. Lipscomb, the clerk of the court, dated December 26, Dr. Ewell wrote that he had hoped to inquire what else is proper for me to do besides return to your office the warrant and the verdict of the coroner's jury. Ewell was unaware of the next steps needed for him to conclude his investigation. He outlined many errors he had made in the inquest in this letter to the clerk. First, he mentioned that there was much confusion and excitement. The Negro house was crowded and darkened. Here, he implied that it had been hard to investigate the first night. Second, Dr. Ewell claimed that he had been pressed for time and wanted to expedite the proceedings so that he could prevent tragic violence. Frozen ink and benumbed fingers. Dr. Ewell said he had been taking notes using a dip pen, which required an ink reservoir to refill, which was common in 1856. Doing so on a cold December night could have very well caused frozen ink fingers. He also complained that he had no desk or table to write on. In other words, he provided ample justification for the brevity of the notes and a rush inquest with multiple errors. However, the coroner made reference to preventing tragic violence, implying that the neighbors were inclined to inflict vigilante justice that night, yet there was no corroborating evidence of the claims of a mob. Ewell acknowledged that he should have affirmed a scroll to each of the signatures to the verdict, which I believe was neglected. He added, perhaps I ought to have recognized the witnesses appear at court, but the confessions of the 3 culprits caused me to doubt the necessity of so doing. In other words, the 2 nights after the murder, the Prince William County coroner admitted that he had grossly failed to do due diligence. During the inquest investigation and subsequent legal process, each one of his mistakes or failures could justify the evidence being thrown out and charges dropped for white suspects, but because they were enslaved black people, no one cared that the investigation consisted of a flurry of errors. Coroner Ewell's mistakes, coupled with his decision to appoint Green slaveholding neighbors to the inquest jury, created undue prejudice and stacked the case against Nellie and her relatives. With an inquest jury composed of such, they could not hope for leniency. The trial of Nellie and her family began January 6, 1857, in the Prince William Court of Oyer and Terminer. Like in so many other southern states, enslaved people charged with capital murder and the Commonwealth of Virginia would not receive a jury by trial. Instead, county justices presided over a court of Oyer and Terminer for capital cases involving enslaved people. The combination of the justices' ignorance of the law and procedure, coupled with their own bias, nearly guaranteed unfairness, according to a prominent jurist and legal scholar, A. Leon Higginbotham Jr. Quote, slaves were doubly damned. Not only were they deprived of jury by duty, but in addition, they were tried by inept and unlearned justices, close quote. Commonwealth versus Nellie and others was no different. The Prince William County justices in this case were Seymour Lynn, John C. Whedon, William W. Thornton, John Underwood, and John B. Grayson, all of whom were slaveholders. Grayson lived in Green's neighborhood. Underwood owned 1 slave, Grayson 3, and Whedon and Thornton 7 each. Seymour Lynn owned 28 enslaved people, making him among the biggest slaveholders in the county. Grayson also served as the county justice of peace. Even the prosecuting attorney, Eppa Hutton, owned 8 enslaved people, Hutton served as the Commonwealth's prosecutor for Prince William County in 1849 to 1861. In that time, he convicted at least 4 enslaved women who were subsequently executed, including Agnes, who was convicted in 1850 of the murder of her owner, Gerard Mason, Nellie and Betsy in 1857, and Lucy, who was convicted of murdering her mistress, Arminta Moxley, in 1859. Hence, Ethel Hutton convicted more cases involving enslaved women who were subsequently condemned to execution than any other prosecutor in American history. The court assigned separate public defenders for each of the accused: Charles E. Sinclair, Nellie; Douglas Tyler, Betsy; Nathan Tyler, James; J.M. Forbes, Elias; and John P. Phillips, Ellen. White slaveholding men, Green's neighbors, were the only witnesses at the trial. Many of them had served on the inquest jury. As black people, the defendants were not permitted under Virginia law to testify in any trial involving whites, even on their own behalf. George P. Tyler gave the same testimony he had given in the coroner's inquest, mostly about what he had witnessed on the Green farm the night that Green was murdered and during the coroner's inquest the next day. According to Luther Lynn's testimony, when he first arrived on the farm that night of Green's death, it looked as if something had been butchered because there's a good deal of blood in the yard. Lynn was the only witness to testify the bloody axe and James's jacket were found under the bed in the slave quarters, and that the clothing of Nellie and her family members was more or less bloody. Lynn made the point of refuting the claims that Nellie about her owner, because slave owners measured the goodness of their peers in terms of what they provided materially for their enslaved people. Lynn set out to prove that Green had been a good master by listing the various types of food, snacks, and drinks found in their cabins, clearly hoping to refute Nellie's claim that Green had not given them enough food. Lynn also testified that Green's enslaved people were well-clothed, never saw a more comfortable Negro house. It was weatherboarded and sealed inside, 2 beds downstairs and 2 upstairs, all comfortable with an unusual quantity of wearing apparel hanging up on the bedstands. Based on these observations about their material comfort, Lynn concluded that Green was one of the best masters, and his people were as well taken care of as any slaves in the county. Nell and her kin thought otherwise, according to Philip D. Lipscomb, the court clerk. When he told Nellie that he believed the Green to be the mild, good man, she retorted, saying that I, Lipscomb, knew nothing about him, and that he had taught school up there on the property and treated the children so bad that none of them liked him. Lipscomb believed these claims to be damn lies. Nellie's claim about how Green treated free white students is suggestive of how he must have treated enslaved people. Because black Americans were prohibited from testifying in court, their perspectives were not heard or considered by the justices, just one way in which the process created inherent unfairness. Because they could not testify in court, the confessions of Nellie and her family could not be told through the testimony of whites who heard them confess. Constable B.F. Patty, who had arrested the family and transported them to jail, claimed that while he was transporting them, the whole father confessed me an agency in murder. Lipscomb testified that Nellie and her family members had confessed to him, too. He explained that she had told him that Green had been a bad owner and explained why they had wanted him dead. Lipscomb is the only person to testify that the defendants told him before they hit their owner with an axe they had begged him to sell them. Green allegedly refused and retorted that they would all be hung for what they had done. Allegedly, he refused to sell them, led Nettie to follow through on their last option. It's best to kill him. The principles of the black feminist practice of justice reveal that enslaved women who took justice into their own hands always tried other options before murder, including everyday resistance or even asking to be sold. Justices found Nellie and her entire family guilty of murder. When the convicted defendants were asked to offer any reason why the court should not proceed with the judgment and execution, they didn't utter a word. The court summarily scheduled Nellie, her daughter, and grandchildren to be executed for their crimes on February 13th, 1857, between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. because Virginia compensated owners of enslaved people executed by the state. The court had to estimate the worth of each. Nellie, advanced in age, was said to be worth nothing. Betsy, valued at 300, James at 800, Elias at 600, Ellen at 300. Nellie did communicate how she felt about being executed for murder. The last person to testify in the Commonwealth v. Nellie and others was R.G. Davis, who told the court that when he told Nellie she better prepare to meet her God, she replied she was all right on that question. Like many other women featured in this book, who also used the black feminist practice of justice in the age of slavery, did not fear justice on earth or divine justice in the afterlife for murdering Green. Her declaration was that she was all right on that question of meeting her God leaves three possibilities: that Nellie felt forgiven by God, that she felt her crime was justified because she believed Green to be so truly evil, or three, that she was reconciled to eternal damnation. Regardless, hers was a radical mindset in the 19th century world of Christianity, which conveyed a different messages about murderers, That plus her seemingly fearlessness and ready confessing to every gory detail when questioned by the inquest jury is consistent with so many other black women in this book. When faced with the inevitability, inevitably, of her death sentence. Immediately after the sentencing, some people began to question the ethics of executing Ellen and Elias, who were minors, and in 1801, the law gave the Virginia governor the option of sale and transportation instead of execution. In light of that, the defense attorneys and others began to petition Governor Wise for a stay of execution for the minors. Thomas B. Bayless, the Prince William County resident who had previously served as a minister of the Presbyterian Church of Snow Hill, Maryland, wrote to Virginia Governor Henry Wise asking him to stay executions of the minor children. And a letter dated January 24th, Bayless suggested that Ellen and Elias, who had barely passed their age of accountability, might have been pressured to participate by their elders, speculating that the children might have been threatened, even to the peril of their lives, to take part in the infamous deed. Because of that and other appeals, Governor Wise granted stay of execution for Ellen and Elias on February 6, 1857, owing to their youth and feeble intellects, just 1 week before their scheduled executions. He postponed their execution until May 22nd. Nellie and her family, who were in the same jail cell, spent their last night together, singing hymns and praying as a family. Clergy who attended to them up to the date of their execution reported that Nellie and her family expressed great penance for the murder. That report, however, is dubious because the clergy were expected to say that. Moreover, there's no other independent evidence that the family articulated any remorse. On February 13th, the scheduled date of execution, Nellie, Betsy, and James were escorted from their jail cell at noon, guarded by the Prince William County Sheriff, his deputies, and the jailer. They must have said their final heartfelt goodbyes to Ellen and Elias. They were loaded into a 2-horse wagon to be transported to Brentsville, the place of execution. One newspaper reported that the three sang hymns on the journey. A crowd traveling by foot and horseback followed the wagon that carried them to their final destination. Nellie, her daughter, and grandson arrived at the waiting audience of roughly 1,000 spectators, many of whom were black Americans. The county had constructed new gallows on an acre of land, which easily accommodated the large crowd. As the case of Phyllis and Mark, Rose Butler, and Jane Williams, and others, the execution of enslaved people who murdered their owners was performative and ritualized spectacles. The Alexandria Gazette And the Virginia Advertiser reported that Nellie, Betsy, and James mounted the stairs of the gallows with apparent alacrity, expressing their willingness to pay for their crimes. And one final statement, one of them declared that they placed their trust in Jesus and believed that they had repented as to have secured salvation through him. Clearly, Nellie, her daughter, and grandson found a degree of peace in the moments before their execution, a momentary peace in the world without Green. They did not fear death, the pain of execution, or God's judgment on their souls for the murder. And that way, their last moments are consistent with the black feminist practice of justice. Why does she keep using that? Black feminist. Okay. The fate of the twins was left to the governor, and Virginia, the governor, had the power to pardon or stay execution. Most of the compelling moral imperative to grant clemency was the young age of Elias and Ellen. The logic behind that is that children have not developed independent, complex thoughts to understand life or death consequences of their actions. Another factor is that the children could have been coerced to assist their mother or their grandmother. Coercion can mean many things within a family, but at the least enslaved parents expected their children's emotional support and assistance, even direct participation in covert and overt community resistance to slavery. Some white Virginians following the case understood the coercion as a denial of the children's personal choices. Ellen and Elias never suggested they had been forced into violence. In fact, it is the two young people that completed his murder. Governor Wise decided to stay Ellen and Elias's execution temporarily, citing their young age as justification. Some local slaveholders were upset with that decision. John B. Grayson, one of the justices in the case, who also lived in Green's neighborhood, wrote to Governor Wise in protest of his decision, quote, "I do not know upon what ground you consider that it is your duty as governor of Virginia to respite those Negroes, but I am perfectly certain that in no petition has been a respite or pardon circulated for signatures or signed by a single respectable man in this county." Close quotes. Grayson went on to diminish the twins' age as a significant factor in their capacity to make independent, mature decisions. Instead, Grayson tried to use their physical features as more fitting measured for adulthood. Quote, "The woman," note Grayson referred to Ellen as a woman instead of a girl, "is a large size for a woman and very well developed physically, probably as well developed as she ever will be." Close quote. He insisted that Elias' intelligence was proven the fact that Green had trusted him to deliver his peanuts to the train depot. Grayson closed by insisting that the sentence was perfectly just and that warned the governor that any further interference with these executions would be an improper control of our county's business. Grayson ended this letter by telling the state executive that anyone who did not reside in Prince William County had no more of a right to petition about the county's business than I've advised that you not allow your overseer in Accomack to whip up one of your Negroes there who disobeyed them. The fact that a justice in the trial was so personally invested that he went in these lengths to ensure the children were executed underscores the biases of the justices. Seemingly unmoved by Grayson's entreaties, Governor Wise reduced Ellen and Elias' sentences for sale and transport instead of execution. The twins were subsequently transported from Gordonville to Richmond. The historical record is silent on whether they remained in Richmond or were sold outside the Commonwealth of Virginia. History is littered with stories of enslaved Virginia women who resisted slavery. By the time Nellie and her daughter and grandson were hanged for murdering their owner, nearly 100 other enslaved women had been executed before them. Just 7 years earlier in the same Virginia county, Agnes hacked her owner, Gerald Mason, to death as he slept. In Richmond, 5 years earlier, Jane Williams had done the same with the family that owned her. What makes Nellie, Betsy, and Ellen unique is that none of these other women's resistance was part of a 3-generational family plan led by its 60-year-old matriarch. Nellie is the oldest enslaved woman to be executed in Virginia. Nellie and her kin did not intend to end slavery that day, nor did they seek personal freedom from it. That does not mean that they were not motivated by a revolutionary vision. They wanted the same things that enslaved people had in their neighborhoods: a decent owner, Christmas, mobility, leisure time, church, and meat. And their enslavers' perspective, their desire to ameliorate their condition and demand personal and autonomy was radical. What lived in the heart of revolutionary dreams for enslaved women was not violence, but fairness, freedom, sustenance, and humanity. Let's stop here for now. What you guys say? So I'm going to take a couple minutes again for all of you that are on, 149 of you that are on Twitter. I do this periodically. I have this channel called the Angry Black Men's Book Club. We've been around for a minute. We read all kinds of black history books, and we also read stuff, just all kinds of stuff. You should subscribe. For all of you that are in the other channels, I have I put it up there earlier too. Twitter things. I have Facebook, but Facebook has messed with me so much I don't use it that often. But look to see more of these. I'm going to probably do another reading. I've got a couple of other books because I want to talk about racial violence and selling out. And I'm probably going to do some other interviews. So yes, I want to thank everybody. What time is it? It's almost 1 in the morning. Enjoy, share. And again, this book is really good. Brooding Over Bloody Revenge, Nikki M. Taylor. I've been reading a series of these books. When Rape Was Legal, I had a couple books, and I've got one I was reading. I'm going to go back to it. When They Were Her Property, we got to talk about white feminism. The Angry Black Men's Book Club. Join, subscribe, like, share. If you know someone that's an asshole, I have all these videos. I haven't locked them. If they get locked, it's YouTube that did it. I haven't put everything on Patreon. I haven't done the members only. I will eventually do it. I keep saying that, but I would rather this get out because it's not enough. Also, these are 2 massacres. I mentioned this one earlier. I'll be reading from this a little bit later. The Slocum Massacre down in Texas, 1910, just went around just killing people. There were a lot of massacres in the Civil War. This is one of them, the Saltville Massacre. And I have another one, Fort Pillow, where they massacred hundreds of people. I might just read portions of these. I'm not going to read the whole book because it just takes forever. There's a Confederate resurgence. I'm going to be reading these over this Juneteenth thing, so I'll probably do some tomorrow, some Saturday at night, some Sunday. But we'll just talk about these killing, violence. People need to understand why we need to delineate. We need to understand. And there's another classic, the Rayford Logan Betrayal of the Negro. You can get these on Amazon. And please donate to the channel, like the channel, subscribe. There are multiple ways. If you ever want to do it, I've got a Patreon and a Venmo. So let's do it. My Venmo is DrRandyShort. If you just absolutely want to send something there, and I have to check my account. But a Venmo, DrRandyShort. I have a Patreon, which is DrRandyShort. The Cash App is $DrRandyShort. The Cash App and a Zelle, they both have the same thing. It's my email, wrandyshort@gmail.com. WRANDYSHORT@gmail.com. And at the same time, I enjoy talking to people about genealogy and books and research. So, you're free to email me if it's serious. I'm not afraid to talk to brothers. I'm not into bussy, although I do love brotherhood. And sisters, don't be afraid. I may cuss a little bit, but I'm a gentleman, so I'm not going to call you and try to hit you up with the booty call. I'm very serious about the movement, about our people. And before I leave, I want to leave you with the greeting. And I do this MFM. Okay, let's do it. M. We're all in, and this is how we delineate. This is our gang. This is M, this is F, and this is the other M. And that stands for motherfucking money. We need reparations. What Juneteenth should be for us is a major day to organize around reparations. I hope you had a good time. Um, yes, I did get the book on the post Civil War killings. Where is it? I think it's wait a second. I was just looking at it. I do have the book on the post Civil War killing. I just put it down. Is this might be it. Here. This is the book you're asking about. I read from this too. This is called The Record of Murders and Outrages. There are many of these books. Okay, so yeah. If you send a Pat Talk, that's wonderful. You sent that to Chef C. We all work together. So let's talk to, there are a group of us. We help each other with content. We try to do stuff. I'm looking forward to having Peter Bailey as a guest to talk about books. I got to work on that. This is the book. It's called The Record of Murders and Outrages. The lowball number of black people murdered after the Civil War is over 50,000 black people were murdered. And that doesn't touch the people that died from disease and other things. We had a Holocaust following the Civil War. And our established black historians and others really don't push that. Please share. I have other books. I have dozens of videos. I'm going to say this to everybody. They shadow banned the hell out of my chapter. I've got to really be careful now. I've told people the FBI thinks I'm a spy that worked for Iran. I have lots of Iranian friends. When they bombed the Iranian national television, I used to be over there. I mean, I'm not a Muslim. I'm not a fundamentalist. I'm not a terrorist. I believe in justice and human rights. And I went to Iran to talk about how black people are treated here. I'm not ashamed of that. And I'll do it again. I'd go to China. I'd go to North Korea. I want people to give us our damn money and stop screwing us, and you can't replace us with illegals. I'll tell anyone that, any place, anytime, anywhere. But my channels are always bothered. So you have to share it. If you don't see it, look for it. But I've got videos on topics if they don't take them down. Eventually, I'm going to, I do have a website. There's an Angry Black Men's Book Club website. And I just have to check and just put all my videos there because it's just time. And so please share, support the channel. And that's what I do. I couldn't even buy all this stuff. The people that like me sharing the information allow me or empower me to get stuff. But this is the one I want to read. This Palestine. It's near Palestine, Texas. This isn't far from where Carmelo lives. This is just minutes. This isn't far from where Carmelo lives. Wake up. For the person, Trap Horse, if you guys, excuse me, you can always email me if there's something that you want me to do. I may not see exchanges here, but my email is DrRandyShort@gmail.com. Serious people I talk to, if you're a fool or flake, I simply don't talk to you. But you can always write me if I can't respond to you in this. But let me stop. I got to go in for my mother to get her car inspected and certified. So I'm going to stop. And let me see. And let me see. As for this person, I don't know what Tariq Nasheed does. I do me. I may do something, may talk to Tariq now and then. You got something to say to Tariq? Reach out to him. I can't tell people what they do or don't do. I know I'm not stealing from people. And it's just rude, okay? It's rude to come to me. That's a grown man. If someone's got a case, sue someone, take them to court. You don't tell the third person. It's immature. It's not mature. It's not very manly either. It's small. It's petty. And I'd rather such people never ever talk to me. Someone does you wrong, someone steals from you, take it to that person. Don't tell me. That's an ugly trait. And so I'll give you one warning. Please never do that on my platform. I don't go on other people's things and say stuff about a third person. Whoever you are, return to the brother. So, you know, uh, I can't have that. I'm sorry, I'm not going to give a warning. Never do that. I don't go to anyone's channel and accuse people and do like gang, passive, pussy mouth bastard bullshit and say something about someone I know. I may talk to, I may see Boyce Watkins. I don't know him that well. I don't talk to him. So don't come and talk to me about him. What does it have to do with me? That's childish. That's not manly. I don't like that. Black men, never do that with me. I'll never talk to you. It's not right. Don't talk to me about another person. I wouldn't do that to someone else. I don't tolerate that. So yeah, I just had to cut that off. Don't ever do that to me. If Tariq did something, if anyone does something wrong to someone, that person